This story is about a boy named Poro. Today, he is entering his second year at Tenchai High School, having been in a class with. The main character was no ordinary person, but the very real demon prince. Since Poro was a demon, he was already about 2,000 years old, despite still looking like a child. The guy tried to calm down, because if he was so nervous, he wouldn't be able to contain his demonic power. The hero tried to calm himself down, for it was one thing to be afraid of public speaking, but if this continued, they would see his true form. Meanwhile, the teacher at the door was telling the class that from now on they would have a new friend. The excitement was making Poro sick and he thought he was about to vomit. He finally found a way to get to his favorite land of the rising sun, Japan. Also, he could blow it on the first day. Poro didn't want to do that, because if he did, he'd have to go back to that horrible place, the demon world. In his demon world, power ruled everything and it was chaos. There were all sorts of monsters who killed each other, constantly increasing their rank. Demons only cared about one thing, and that is their power. Becoming stronger, they received the right to imprint their names in the ranking of strength, and for a demon greater joy has never been. Every battle of the demon was reflected in its ranking, so they were day after day with great enthusiasm, either fighting or killing each other. The demon world knew no such things as justice or civility, and its endless flow of blood, and its inhabitants accept no other life. But there was one exception demon who would never accept this status quo. That demon was His Highness the Prince, who decided he couldn't take it anymore. With tears in his eyes, the vice shouted that he hated everything here. By the way, the demon Prince Poro was at the first place in the power ranking of the entire demon world. Every single day for 2,000 years, these monsters had forced him to use his power. This was despite the fact that he was a prince who despised this kind of destructive behavior, and he didn't want to continue living like this for the rest of his life. The monsters noticed that the prince's wishes were, as always, too unreasonable. The current demon king was to retire after a year. On that day, the ranking champion would be crowned as His Majesty's heir, and that was the custom of the demons. No demon could escape the fate of the ranking, and such was the lowly fate of the protagonist. The only criterion for disqualification was death. It would be logical to conclude that His Highness should purposely let himself be killed or kill himself on his own. But the Poro did not intend to do so. He didn't understand why it had to be this way. From a young age, he had been attacked by thousands of scumbags while he went out to buy his usual manga. They were so eager to raise their ratings on him. The hero always acted strictly within the law and self-defense, and still, be that as it may, lawful defense was just as likely to earn him rating points. The title of prince in this world was nothing if he lacked the strength to inherit the title of king. And his father, His Majesty the King, should have rejoiced at the power of Poro. But the lad shouted that he was not the prince who longed to become a tyrant like his father. What he liked most was to relax and read in silence, and he always chose the genre of seinen to read. Poro didn't even notice how his manga turned out to be another monster trying to kill him. His challengers were popping up literally out of nowhere. The monsters that were watching this from the side smirked and decided that it looked as pathetic as ever. They were amused by the fact that the main character was the pinnacle of their diabolical species. The demon named Paradise turned to the Prince of Poro and asked them to fill in their words. They were confident that this time they would definitely beat the crap out of him and soar to the top of the rankings. Demon Fu supported his partner and said that they would become great demon kings, so the Poro could prepare. The guy was shocked that they were challenging him again, since he had previously asked them to stop this nonsense several thousand times already. The demons decided that they had had enough of the prince's whining and ordered him to die. In an instant, the demons lost the prince's vice and apologized to him. As he left, the guy asked to be spared their sight if it was finally enough for them. The demon that constantly followed the prince said that perhaps the fact that His Majesty avoided delivering the finishing blow was to blame. But the hero was unwilling to become a butcher. Besides, if he took their lives, it would lead to more of their kind. In the world of demons, there were only violent and feeble-minded creatures obsessed with violence, and the hero was fed up with the place. But not all of his life was sheer despair. There was one thing that could comfort his tormented and fading heart, and that was his refuge and his oasis. The character spoke of the human world he periodically visited. Poro opened the doors of his room and found himself in an ordinary room that was cluttered with a lot of junk. Seeing all this beauty, the demon thought to himself that this was marvelous. He had nothing but infinite admiration for the human world. Human culture in these days was becoming more and more accessible to those living in the demonic world. It was creative and the vice marveled at its prowess. Because of this, the hero could only marvel at their diversity. The demon was delighted with the merch he ordered yesterday. His package had arrived very quickly. For a member of the royal family born and raised in a world where only death and destruction existed, everything looked new and mesmerizing, like the light of radiation. Although the purposes of many objects defied any of his imagination, the hero thought that perhaps their function was something so great and creative that it was impossible for a demon like him to understand their uses. Poro was sure he was absolutely right about that. What attracted him the most was a country called Japan. It was said to be a place of peace and beneficence, being a stark contrast of a demonic world with a mild climate and natural sights. The country had a great approach to art, shaped by beautiful nature, and so on and so forth. It could be said that this country absorbed everything he admired in the human world. Life in Japan was too good to be true, and the hero set about learning the language and began to fill a notebook with what the Japanese had to offer, and so on and so forth. These are the depths to which he allowed himself to immerse himself in this country. Poro thought about how good it would be for him to be there, and he really wished he could live in Japan. Suddenly, an amazing thought popped into his head. In all his 2,000 years of life, he had never been as determined as he was at that moment. Poro decided right then and there to go to Japan. Once he made up his mind, the rest went smoothly. There were countless ways to go to another dimension, but he went on the study trip because the study visa was the easiest and fastest to get. The main character was sure that they would try to stop him, so he didn't tell anyone anything about it. He just wrote a letter asking them not to look for him and took the Shinkansen train to the human world for the first time in his life. Still, his bombastic title of Demon King was merely a symbol of power, and if he left it as a draw, no one would be worse off for it. It was interesting that after spending so much time learning the Japanese language, culture, sights, and so on, he definitely didn't need to worry too much about everyday life. Poro was thrilled that he would now say goodbye to his nonsense about the fate of the future king, because he would be going to a new life in the human world he loved. The boy almost cried with happiness and thought about his wonderful human life starting right now. Thinking back to himself in the past, the hero couldn't believe that he could have been so enthusiastic. Now that he was already here, he was extremely nervous, and his demonic energy wouldn't stop oozing through his body. The hero heard the teacher ask to get ready to greet a new classmate and asked Poro to come in. The hero was hit with a wave of fear and thought that this was very, very bad. He had heard earlier that citrus scent was good for calming the nerves and thought he was well prepared for such an opportunity. But as soon as the hero pulled out the lemon, the berry began to devour him on its own. Poro was shocked that he himself was being eaten by the lemon. The battered and bleeding hero was still able to calm down a bit, although it was unclear how. After thinking about his self-presentation, the hero decided that there was nothing to worry about and he just needed to believe in himself. He needed to remember that he was learning Japanese to the point of exhaustion, not to mention etiquette and tradition. The character was going to use bright and cheerful expressions and speak loud and clear. He has also prepared some hilarious jokes to melt the student's ice. A good first impression is the first step to a fruitful student life, and his life will start out rosy in the world of people. Thinking of this, the hero took hold of the door handle and opened the door. But Poro was so worried that he didn't notice as he kicked open the door to the classroom. He asked how everyone was doing and introduced himself by name. All the students along with the teacher were shocked at what they saw when the door along with part of the wall collapsed to the floor with a crash. All the students immediately compared the new student to a gorilla, but even no gorilla in the world could do such a thing. It must have been just a coincidence to them. But people didn't understand what kind of coincidence could make the wall collapse from the boy's closed door. All the students immediately started whispering amongst themselves and discussing the boy's incident. Poro sat down at one of the desks and tearfully thought about someone killing him. He had forgotten how great the difference in strength between humans and demons was. That kind of strength wouldn't even be enough to move an ordinary door in the demon world. In any case, he should be more careful if they suddenly revealed his identity somehow. They'd probably be begging for mercy and asking for him to go back to the hole he crawled out of, since it wasn't his world. But perhaps some would recognize that he was a prince and admire him. Disaster was quite likely, and then one could say goodbye to hopes of a cheerful and carefree human life. The hero believed that things were out of control and it was obviously too late. The best he could hope for was to take in the sights, and then he would be back in the demon world again. While he was thinking about that, someone reached out their hand to the threshold. One of his classmates greeted Poro and put his hand on his shoulder. He told the Poro that it was a cool performance and thanked him for such a show. Out of surprise, the hero jumped up on the spot, thus breaking his desk in two. Poro was shocked and didn't expect anyone to talk to him. His classmate didn't think the desk could bend like that. At that moment, Poro covered his desk and pretended not to know what he was talking about. The guy introduced himself as Yuta, and as it turned out he was sitting right behind the hero. Yuta asked him to come to him if he needed help. Besides, he was indebted to his kindness. Yuta was curious about what the hero was doing and noticed a book in his hands about the sights in Tenti. Yuta was delighted that the Poro even left notes. The lad also liked the Poro's handwriting. The hero replied that he would actually like to do the daily activities of this country, but it was hard to find materials about such things. His classmate immediately thought he was a migrant. In addition, he had a strange name and eye color. The boy wondered where the hero came from. Poro thought it was bad and said too much to this person. He tried to explain that he came here from a very distant place, and Yuta thought he was mocking him. But if he was so reluctant to say it, the Yuta was willing to leave him alone. In any case, if things were like this, he could be his guide to the city, which surprised Poro. Yuta smiled and said that he had already guessed that the guy was inexperienced in everything, and if he was looking for fun, then he was the one for it. Yuta was willing to hang out with him after school for games, karaoke, movies, bowling, the oceanarium. He didn't care what place he went to. He wanted to ask the surprised hero where he wanted to go, and Poro came to mind. The hero exclaimed that he wanted to visit everywhere, and Yuta liked his ambitiousness. Meanwhile, a couple of demons were discreetly watching the Poro from the trees that grew in the schoolyard. They had no idea that this little rascal would be hiding in the human world. One of the demons wondered what they would do next and offered to finish him off right away. But his friend asked him to calm down and said that they would wait for the right time to do so. Yuta took the hero to a movie theater and told him that if he watched this movie, he would die in 7 minutes. Poro laughed and of course didn't believe it. By the way, Yuta decided to remember how much time had passed since he said that to him. There was a frightening and jarring scene in the movie that made Poro's hair stand on end and he screamed. After the movie, the hero told Yuta that it was cool. It was good that it was over, otherwise he would have wet himself. The hero wondered why people paid a lot of money to watch horror movies. Yuta smiled and replied that some people got high on horror movies and called the guy a fool. He asked the Poro where they would go next. The hero had so many things on his list that he kept having trouble deciding where to go next. An arcade, a bowling alley, a movie theater. Each one of them exceeded his expectations for fun. He craved more fun and his ambition knew no bounds. Yuta winked at the Poro and it seemed to him that the hero had found what he was looking for. The boy smiled and thought through his tears that he was right to go to the human world. Yuta didn't understand what he meant and the hero waved his head saying he didn't say anything. At some point the hero didn't notice as he bumped shoulder to shoulder with a man walking by. From the looks of it, it was a gang of young guys that asked to respect their elders and demanded an apology. Besides, this insult deserved compensation. The guy thought the vice knew what he was talking about. He would let him hit himself 10 times and then give him some cash. The guys that accompanied his friend laughed and said that their Kensuke was ruthless as usual. Poro stared at the tall guy in surprise. The hero apologized to them and said that he was always so absent-minded. But the guy grabbed his clothes and told him to end it. After all, he's not a monster after all. That's why he said he would only get off with 10 punches and cash. Kensuke asked him to show him his wallet and not to try to mess with him. The guys laughed and told Kensuke that he was pretty cold-blooded and a bad man. No sooner had the bully offered to say goodbye to his friend than a fist punch flew into his face. Poro stared in surprise at Yuta, who punched the high school student in the face with all his might. The guy flew backwards and fell to the ground, which caused the rest of his guys to be worried. Yuta thought they were from a high school gang called the Mayans, and in all likelihood was right. There were rumors that they had made up about expanding their activities. It was as if Yuta had become a different person and stretched his fingers with a crunch. The gang guys didn't realize who Yuta thought he was. They started to threaten him, but at some point one of the guys noticed a familiar beret in his hair. Turns out they knew Yuta. Yuta was the most reckless troublemaker in Tenti, called Yuta the Debachi. The guy stretched his arms and smiled, saying they hurt his feelings. Yuta was going to beat the crap out of a chantrope like them. He was otherwise a law-abiding citizen and obeyed traffic laws and so on. But that didn't bother their abusers at all. Yuta told them that the other day he had busted a pickpocket and caught a pedophile. But as they had said earlier, they didn't care about that. The boys had a grudge against Yuta and said that the little guy was sticking his nose where it didn't belong. They asked him to get lost, because it was none of his business. But Yuta answered the boys that they were too tight and he had reason to beat them up. He called the hero his daddy, and threatened that if they laid a finger on him, he would send them all to a hospital bed. Yuta went full out and asked to attack as soon as they were ready. But the gang of high school students immediately ran away, asking Mr. Yuta for forgiveness. The hero was surprised by his action, but he had never heard of the meaning of the word dachai. Yuta was shocked that the guy didn't know that. Besides, he wondered what happened to his sense of time. In other words, the word meant that he was his friend. Yuta pointed his finger at the hero and then at himself. In this way, he clarified the fact that they were friends. Yuta then apologized to the boys for keeping them waiting and ran after them. Pono was happy to be called a friend. He had learned all about it from the anime and manga. Friendship was a good human relationship built on mutual trust and empathy. The demon world, on the other hand, was plagued by rage, rejection, and betrayal. Such a valuable type of relationship could never be found there. While the hero was in the thrill of being a friend now, Yuta caught up with the gang and fought with them. The guys couldn't understand what was wrong, or why Yuta's strength was so abnormal. As they fought, Yuta provoked the guys and thought that was all they were capable of. He knew their kind and said they were aiming for easy targets and running from the big dogs. The gang leader glared with rage at the Yuta who thought he was tough. Something jingled in his hands, and Pono thought it was a weapon. The boy swung at Yuta and ordered him to die. But Pono noticed in time that his friend was in danger. He shouted to the Yuta and asked him to turn around. Pono put his hands forward and didn't even realize how he had somehow pushed the Kensuke back with terrible force. His blow was so unimaginable that the guy was thrown to the ceiling, from which he ricocheted and fell to the floor with a clatter. The Kensuke guys ran up to him and started to bring him to his senses. They cursed the guys and promised that they would regret it. Yuta was of course grateful to the Pono for covering for him, but he had no idea that the hero was so strong and the Pono was covered in cold sweat. Yuta heard someone calling for an officer and decided it was time for them to get the hell out of here. He grabbed the hero's arm and pulled him along, telling him that karaoke was next in line for them. Meanwhile, two demons were watching everything going on in the upper floors of the building. They thought that these goons were overly stupid and didn't realize that they were trying to shake down money from the strongest demon. One of the demons laughed at how the Poro tried his best to fit in with them and failed so miserably. His partner thought the Poro had a rather pathetic look. One of the demons had to admit that this human world was drawing him in. There were some pretty interesting games and pretty girls here, and offered his partner some fun as well. But his partner asked him to stay focused and concentrate on their mission. The only reason why they followed him here is to fulfill their great dream and kill the protagonist, thus gaining the right to become candidates for king. He was very careful with people and couldn't draw attention to himself, and there would surely never be a better chance for them again. And best of all, the demons found a gap in their opponent's defense. With these thoughts, one of the demons gave a glance to Yuta. While the Pono entertained themselves and sang songs, the Yuta brought them a drink and placed glasses of drinks on the table. Yuta lightly poked the hero in the shoulder and asked him not to stop singing, because a worker was passing by them. The hero blushed and said he was embarrassed. Pono decided to look at the list of songs he wanted to sing. Suddenly, they heard voices outside who were shy and hesitated to come in to see them. Pono began to perform a song about best friends, dedicating it to Yuta. Earlier, he was madly worried from the terrible self-presentation, but no one could think that he would try so many things on the first day. The hero thought that coming to the human world, it was the best decision of his life. 30 minutes later, the hero decided to check if Mr. Yuta was okay. He opened the doors of the room and thought that the booze had decided to take revenge on him. But what he saw surprised the hero greatly. Right in front of him, a pentagram was drawn on the wall with the inscription. Pono didn't understand why it was drawn on the wall. In addition, he recognized the old devil language. The message said that if he wanted to save his friend, he had to come to them. This seal was a hellhole for instant travel. The hero realized that there was another demon in this world, and he must have taken Yudu-san. But the Pono didn't understand what they used it for. But no matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't come to a conclusion. In any case, he had to return the Yudu first. The hero ran up to the pentagram and touched it. At that instant, the entire space around him began to distort. Pono found himself in a completely different place. Looking around, it seemed to him that it was something like a warehouse. A voice behind him rejoiced at their meeting and said that they were indebted to him for the past. Pono turned around and saw the same two demons in front of him who were holding the resisting Yudu. One of the demons warned that if the hero resisted, this boy would die. But Yuta was not confused and bit one of the demons in the arm with all his might. He demanded to let him go, only this time it sounded rougher. The demon's partner asked Rai to stop interacting with the locals. Yuta wanted to warn the Pono about what the two were about to do and asked his friend to run away from here. But the demons covered his mouth with his hands. The demons thought it was funny that their strongest demon could be charmed by humans, and this weakness would now be his undoing. Rai laughed and said that the guy probably couldn't do anything as long as they had a hostage. Pono decided to say it only once and asked to let the Yudu-san go. The demons laughed and said that he was in no position to order them around. Apparently, he had not yet realized the whole situation he was in. The demons thought that right now he could only stand quietly as they would attack him with their magic until he died. Pono didn't think that could be true and swiftly approached his opponents. His body was covered in a demonic aura with which the hero grabbed the guy's heads. At the same moment, there was a huge explosion that struck Yuuo. The guy looked around, trying to realize what just happened. Besides, it was only recently that everyone was here. When the smoke cleared, the astonished Yuta saw a Pono in front of him who was enveloped by a demonic entity. The demons thought it was impossible and assumed that their turn would never come again. There was absolutely nothing they could do about it. The hero angrily grabbed the demons by their clothes and said that they dared to attack him. The two dared to attack his friend and the terrified demons thought that this was their end. The hero asked permission to give them wise counsel and said that he despised killing living beings. With these words, the hero used his blow and created a portal in the sky. Looking up at the sky, the guy realized that he had broken through a gap in the space-time continuum that was connected to the demon world. Both demons were horrified to realize the real power of the strongest of the demons. After saying goodbye to the demons, the guy launched them into the portal and asked them to never come back here again. As a farewell, the demons asked him to remember this and promised that next time they would see his dying breath. As soon as they entered this portal, he immediately disappeared. The sky became clear again and the sun peeked out. Raising his head, the hero was glad to tears that everything ended well. But not only had his identity been revealed, but he had also resorted to violence and even punched a hole in the space-time continuum. All his hard work up to that point had been flushed down the drain. He couldn't even imagine Mr. Yuta's reaction. And after all, he was just starting to get used to being friends with him. He would probably be angry that the hero was tricking him and would ask the monster to stay away. And no matter how far away he escaped, in all likelihood, he would still never escape his fate. Pono decided that the Demon Prince's fun adventures as a human had come to a crushing conclusion. He had yet to notice the Yuta behind him looking at his horns and tail with delight. The boy was thrilled that they were indeed real. The hero was in school and backed away, but Yuta assumed it was supposed to be the other way around. Yuta suggested that Pono start by taking a couple deep breaths. It turned out that those two had nagged him about a lot of things and told him that he was a demon prince or something like that. Yuta extended his hand to the hero with a smile, but Pono admitted that he was intimidated by him. Besides, the speed at which he adapted to his new situation was even more frightening. Surely this conversation should have been a little different. Yuta should have asked the guy if he really was a demon, and then it should have gotten a lot more serious. But Yuta said that after the door and the bullies, he had already come to the conclusion that Pono was an unusual person, no matter how strange it sounded. The hero asked him to stop, for he thought he could blend into this society unnoticed. He was worried that the truth would be discovered, and it was too embarrassing. At this moment, he wanted to fall through the ground. Yuta pulled the guy's hand and asked him to forget about it. He wanted Pono to stop whining for today and lift his friend to his feet. Yuta smiled and said he didn't care if he was human or demon. After all, that was what it meant to be friends. Pono's tears of happiness flowed and he smiled at his friend. Thus, on the first day, the protagonist learned a lot about the splendor of the human world. He realized his destiny and also something very important. Pono liked the human world very much, and he wished he could stay here forever. However, he could not escape from his destiny as a demon king. In his room, the boy wrote a couple of lines in a notebook, and decided that he would meet his fate face to face in this case. The hero was going to collect all the good things in the human world. In a year he would sit on the throne, and from that day forward he would use that good to revolutionize the demon world. A world like the human world he loved will reign in the demon world. The boy thought he had a year left before the regime change, and to turn the vile world of demons into something beautiful, he would record the wonders of the human world in his exchange student diary. He had the goal of learning as many things as possible while traveling through the human world and trying not to die. Meanwhile, the two demons had arrived in their world. All the other demons realized that the prince was having fun in the human world and decided that they had to find him and beat the crap out of him. One day in the middle of the day, one of the boys noticed a demon prince at a stoplight and asked his mother what he was doing there. The mother asked him not to look in his direction and to move on. The main character's name was Poro, and he loved this world of humans very much. He scrutinized the traffic lights, which had two signals. One signal asked to stand and the other to go, and so they ensured the safety of people's movement. In the demon world, they only had three signals: run over, and run over again. By changing to these two signals, they could reduce the number of automobile accidents. In the demon world, only one bloodthirsty maniac ruled. If the protagonist could, he would leave his past behind and live in this dream world. But unfortunately, as the strongest demon, he was to take the throne in a year. What was very likely was that he would be the next demon king. Therefore, he decided to dedicate himself to studying this world. His plan was to turn this hole he called home into a place like this upon his return. Now his job is to fill a journal with as many wonderful things about the human world as he can and bring it home. Poro noticed a passerby carrying an old lady across the street and his tears of joy flowed. He immediately put a note in his journal and said that the empathy was so human and so beautiful. And that was just the beginning. The school duty officer stopped the Kurakami from class 2Es and said that he was 30 seconds late for school. The school duty officer's name was Tadashi Iwao. He was in class 2A and he had a hobby, collecting watches. He took a stern look at the boy and said he was suspended. The hero was shocked and couldn't believe it. He wanted to know the reason, but the duty officer said that he had broken a school rule. Poro was only a few seconds late, but it didn't matter to Tadashi. After all, killing one person made him a murderer. He showed up 30 seconds late and that was still tardy. Poro was shocked that he was comparing being late to murder. In addition, Tadashi said that he was seen breaking many rules. These include destroying a wall in the classroom, breaking a desk, fighting with other students, and climbing on a traffic light. By the way, from the looks of it, he wouldn't say the hero had such a violent temper and was guilty on all counts. Meanwhile, the rest of the students were watching from the window and noticed how Iwao caught the Poro. They could only sympathize with him. No one even noticed a small, rabbit-like, long-eared animal watching them from the roof. The beast grinned and realized that the rumors weren't lying and the demon prince was indeed in the human world. Tadashi grabbed the hero by the cheek and said that since he was a newcomer, he would let him go this time. But he had to remember that there were reasons for the rules. Alcohol and smoking were forbidden because minors were too young for them. Laws kept order in the world. School rules played an important role in raising awareness of society, and he needed to think about that. After all, there was no point in games and sports without rules. The rules protected him, so he had to protect the rules. The rules were also not just for one, but for all. And if the hero didn't respect that, then the Tadashi feared he would have no choice but to suspend him from the school. While he was explaining this to the frightened Poro, the headman heard someone's laughter behind him and turned around. Tadashi noticed some other boys and shouted to them that such a hair color was forbidden. The two immediately realized it was Iwao and decided to run away from him quickly. The hero's legs gave out from fright and he crouched down on the ground. Poro felt uneasy and didn't understand what was wrong with this guy. The strongest demon trembled and admitted that this Tadashi was much scarier than all the other demons. Poro decided that it was better to make a note for the future about strictly following the rules, which was vital. Tadashi ran into some bullies who broke his glasses and the headman looked coldly at the broken glass. One of the bullies asked him not to do that, but his friend asked him to shut up. Besides, the Tadashi was responsible for their punishment. To the bully, these were as small things as smoking or hair color. In the end, the headman put on his broken glasses and said that they were just hopeless. The dark beast from the roof grinned and thought it was perfect for the new wearer. He decided that if he used this guy to kill the Porios, he could become #1. Everyone except Yuta was discussing with each other the strange phenomena with the new student. What they saw gave them goosebumps. There were some strange mushrooms on the upset, and everyone was vigorously discussing the hero's new and strange accessories. They didn't understand the new guy at all. After class, Yuta had to carry the hero on his back, as the Poro was too depressed to walk on his own. He said he had disregarded the school rules and didn't deserve to be here. By the way, he was carrying an evil mushroom that fed on the demon's depression. They tasted like regular mushrooms, and the more depression they had, the faster they grew. Yuta laughed at the guy's concern at Iwao's words. He asked not to take it too seriously. Besides, it seemed to him that the was getting heavier by the minute. Tadashi was too serious and didn't even look like a normal person. Therefore, the protagonist shouldn't have been depressed by this. Yuta suggested to just tell the truth to the headman to bring clarity for him. But the protagonist didn't think that was a good idea. As the heroes were walking through the alleys, suddenly the same blonde-haired beaten bully flew out at them. Apparently, someone had pushed him and he fell, hitting the wall. Yuta and the thief turned their heads and saw the Tadashi coming at them. The headman had already managed to maim and catch his friend. Tadashi saw Yuta and Poro from class 2Es and assumed they were going home. The hero decided to ask the headman what happened to him, but Iwao didn't know what he meant. Poro looked at the beaten bully and then back at Iwao and asked why he did it. Iwao realized that Poro meant the two pieces of trash. Tadashi stepped on the face of the bully and said that it was Tsueshi Sato and Ryu Nakamura from class 2E. They smoked and bleached their hair. They always had trouble following the rules, so he taught them a lesson. but the hero exclaimed that it was horrible and it couldn't be called a lesson. The headman replied that it was truly horrible to break the school rules and expressed his opinion. He thought that the world would be a better place without people like them, and such people should have been destroyed. Poro asked him to stop, and the Tadashi assumed that the hero wanted to get in his way. A dark demonic aura emanated from the headman. Correcting his glasses, the Tadashi told the hero that he would destroy him with them. The headman lunged at the heroes, but Yuta and Poro dodged sideways from the blow. Yuta was surprised that Iwao was able to pierce the asphalt and didn't understand how it was possible. Meanwhile, the bullies came to their senses and decided to run away from such a monster. But Iwao noticed them and shouted to the boys that they would not get away from him so easily. He instantly caught up with the fleeing boys, and the hooligans screamed in terror. But no sooner had Iwao touched the boys than his blow was blocked by the hand of the Poro. Yuta was worried about his friend and called out to him. Poro was confronted by Iwao, who for some reason had the same demonic essence emanating from him. Now the protagonist understood everything, and the headman was surprised when he asked Kirakami who he was. Poro had already realized that he was not Iwao-sama. The headman did not understand what he was talking about, and the hero replied that he was possessed. Iwao didn't realize that something bad had taken over his body, and perhaps the creature had taken advantage of his weakness to kill Poro. But Iwao still didn't understand what he was saying. The hero understood his words, but the Tadashi had said earlier that the rules were for everyone. Meanwhile, in the demon world, there was no law. Although it sounded like freedom, no one was free in a world plagued by chaos and madness, and it only stifled them. Rules made people special. They valued kindness and caring. Law and order was built on moral philosophy, and they existed to make society better. But you couldn't take the law into your own hands to harm people, and Mr. Iwao was clearly not capable of that. Only demons did that. Yuta and the headman looked at the Poro in surprise. The hero clenched the headman's fist harder and ordered the demon to leave Lord Iwao alone. Poro tilted the headman's body and seemed to pull the dark demonic essence out of him. The demon was shocked that the hero was able to pull it out of the host with his bare hands and didn't know that Poro was even capable of such a thing. Yuta caught the body of the headman that was unconscious and asked the hero what it was. It was a rabbit controller that was harmless on its own, but it was poisoning its master's mind and feeding on his negative energy. The rabbit smirked and told the hero that he had caught it. The demon greeted the prince and said that it had been a long time since they had seen each other. The hero was furious and said that Mr. Iwao was a respected man and he dared to play with his soul. The rabbit asked him to stop and admitted that he was at fault. He apologized and asked the poor to pardon him, but at some point the demon admitted he was joking and pounced on the guy. He didn't need a host to kill the hero, but the Poro gave the rabbit a little flick. First he pretended to surrender and then he suddenly attacked the hero. Poro didn't expect anything less from someone who didn't respect the rules. With these words he sent the rabbit into a distant flight. The next day, the protagonist was interested in a red box that allowed people to communicate without magic or electricity. To him, this was simply unbelievable. The passing man was certainly glad he had learned something, but would like to ask for permission to make a phone call. The headman also thanked the hero for bringing him to his senses yesterday. Iwao had already realized that the hero couldn't contain his demonic powers, and that explained the destruction of the wall and the desk. He was running back and forth from his mission to explore the human world, and Iwao had something to tell him. He still couldn't understand the reason why I was late 2 days in a row. The hero got down on his knees and confessed that he didn't have it. Meanwhile, Yuta clapped his hands and laughed at his friend. Iwao remembered what the hero had said to the demon earlier. He said that Headman Iwao was not capable of such a thing and only demons did such things. Tadashi closed his stopwatch and said that he was only a couple minutes late, and that was a great misfortune. Iwao didn't want to be so obsessed with the rules that some demon possessed him and wished it wouldn't happen again. Poro was touched by his words and he looked at Lord Iwao with a smile. Meanwhile, the demon rabbit landed somewhere on the moon. Surprised white rabbits who had not seen it here before ran up to it. In addition, they were surprised that he was dark. The manipulator rabbit tried to come to his senses and realize where he was. The demons named Rai and Fu that had previously attacked the Poro were still in the human world. Rai smirked at the familiar and admitted that they were surprised to see her in the human world. Fu decided it was perfect for a warm-up before fighting the demon prince again. The girl didn't realize who they were and said she didn't have time for some weaklings. She asked the guys to get lost before she changed her mind. The demons replied that of course she could be on top of the fire division, but still they had grown a lot since their last defeat, and so they wanted to show her their true strength. At this moment, a huge bright pillar of light appeared and dispersed the clouds. The girl went on about her business as if nothing had happened, leaving behind her the charred bodies of the surprised demons. The defeated demons thought it was a joke. A girl named Ryuugaku-ki thought that the next demon king would be her husband, and she wouldn't settle for anything less. As Poro read the manga, tears were flowing down his eyes. He exclaimed that it was a true beauty. Meanwhile, Yudu was amused that the hero was crying while reading the seijo. The hero said that demons also married and had children, but there was no such thing as romance in the demon world. To him, it was deep culture such as dating, holding hands, and awkward moments. Yuda suggested that demons don't fall in love at all. Poro explained that strong blood is the only thing demons look for in the opposite sex. They only married to give birth to a stronger demon, and there was no room for romance there. To Yuda, it sounded like breeding racehorses. To a Poro, as a demon, the idea of romantic love was completely new, and it was obvious that the human race cherished it. And if he could study it and bring it home, it should soften their kill or be killed mentality. Yuda had already realized that power was paramount and assumed his friend was quite popular in his world. After thinking for a bit, the hero rolled his eyes and suggested they drop the subject. Yuda didn't understand what the big deal was, but their conversation was interrupted by a teacher that asked the guys for some attention. No sooner had she notified the guys that they had a new student in their class than a girl casually kicked the doors open and greeted everyone. Everything looked exactly like a Poro. She introduced herself as Ryuugaku-ki and said she likes strong guys and was happy to meet them. Yuda thought it was funny that they got another Duro destroyer. Meanwhile, the hero clutched onto his book out of fright. At some point his emotions got out of control and he accidentally tore the book in half. The girl asked Poro how he was doing and told him that his future wife was already here, which made the hero terrified. When it was time for dinner, the girl pinned the guy at the stairs, but the Poro asked him to let go. She ordered him to be silent and asked him what he was thinking when he left and said nothing to his bride. She seemed mad and ripped off the Poro's shirt. She ordered him to finally man up and knock her up, but the hero only begged for help. The hero hoped for his friend and asked him to stop her, but the Yuda felt he had to film it. He just couldn't miss such a sight and pulled out his phone. Yuda noticed that his fiancée was contentedly cute. Just like the hero said earlier, strength was paramount in their world. And to give the best offspring, marriage between strong families was common. The girl clung to the Poro and said that their child would definitely be a strong demon. She suggested they finally get married and make lots of babies. But the hero tried to get rid of her and reminded her that he had told her for 1,000 years that he didn't like noisy women. And demons like her the very reason why he came to the human world and asked to see his diary entries. Here was a thing called romance. It involved men and women living under the same roof, going on dates, eating together. When they get to know each other better, they marry and procreate. Such a mysterious and beautiful tradition people had. The hero would like to know her opinion about it, but the girl did not understand humans at all. She didn't understand why they go through all these problems, because getting together and making children was much easier. Honestly, it was just as much of a mystery to the hero, but there must be something sublime behind it. Yuda was surprised by her friend and the fact that he was writing down relationship material. Poro said that until his mission was accomplished, and he filled this journal with all the wonderful things in this world, he would not return home. He had no time to procreate, and the girl thought he was busy being a real bore. But a thought came into her head, and she decided to help the hero with this romantic endeavor. Ryuugaku said that mating could wait and offered to help him fill out his journal. Poro was surprised at such an offer, but Ryuugaku thought that if everything went well, it could lead to their wedding. The hero wanted to make sure she was sure about it, and the girl said she was game. She offered to figure out all these love things together, which Poro was thrilled about. The first thing they had to do was go on a date. Looking at the whole thing from the outside, Yuta was amused, but he decided not to say anything to them. The heroes came to a zoo where there were many different animals. The hero was delighted and offered Ryuugaku to look at these cute animals. It was their first time in a zoo and the girl didn't understand why keep the animals in an enclosure if people weren't going to eat them. To her, humans were pretty strange. Suddenly, the Poro noticed the panda and pulled the girl's hand to approach the animal. Ryuugaku didn't understand what they were holding hands for, since it was harder to move around that way. The hero himself was clueless, but he had read that it was the way they did it on dates. The girl smirked and thought that the Poro was a real fool if he thought she would be happy to please him. She fumbled in her pocket for a perfume called Kitty. One breath of this drug and any male demon would pounce on her. Earlier, she wasn't even going to help him with the diary and just waited for the vice to let his guard down. A demonic smirk appeared on Ryuugaku's face at the thought of the demon prince making her a woman. But as soon as she was perfumed with her perfume, Immediately all the beasts in the neighborhood began to go crazy. The heroes were overwhelmed by the sharp, deafening cries of the beasts. Yuta and Throde couldn't understand what was happening, as the animals in the neighborhood suddenly went into a frenzy. Ruika looked at the label of the perfume with horror, where there was a warning. These perfumes could provoke animals, and one had to refrain from using them in the human world. The girl thought to herself that she was being played a joke on. In addition, these spirits might not work on strong demons, and Ruika became furious because it was too late to talk about it. Poro noticed that something was wrong with Ruika, but the girl replied that everything was fine. One boy who was near the panda enclosure screamed in fear when the animal broke free, but Ruika ran up to him in time and saved the child from the animal's attack. She wanted to make sure the human child was alright, but the boy was terrified. Ruika looked up and noticed a whole herd of beasts attacking her, but in an instant all the beasts fell to the ground. The hero dispersed the beasts and took Ruika in his arms along with the child. Poro told the boy that at first the animals were furious, but now they were resting. Ruika was shocked at this wild speed, for she could not even understand how he had done it. Poro wanted to make sure the girl was alright, but Ruika freaked out and asked him to be quiet, for she didn't need his help. Poro smiled and praised the Ryuugaku for a good job. In addition, she unknowingly saved the little boy and did so without hurting the animal. The hero was shocked that there was kindness in her. Ruika found his words disgusting and she replied that she hadn't saved anyone. She just didn't like it when the weak were hurt. Anyway, they couldn't continue their date here and needed to go somewhere else. Eventually, the protagonists went to the movies, where the Poro, as usual, sobbed over the touching moments in the movie. Meanwhile, the girl sat stone-faced and thought about how she had screwed up earlier, and things got a little weird by the end. But this time, she decided to take advantage of the darkness and bind him with a demonic snake. And once she did that, she would do whatever she wanted with the spawn. While she was thinking of her own, the Poro exclaimed to Ruika that this is ridiculous. Out of surprise, the Ryuugaku jumped up on the spot, squeezing the snake so tightly that it almost suffocated. The hero was talking about the movie and the Ryuugaku decided to agree with him. He was glad to hear, for the beautiful images and deep thoughts could not stop his tears. Poro knew that it was just a practice date, but he was also happy to spend time with Ruika, and there was no way he could enjoy the day. Ruika was pissed off by this and she would like to ask him not to say it like that. After watching the movie, the protagonists headed to a Sateria restaurant. From what the protagonists read, she implied heartache and excitement. It was quite difficult for him even though dating was quite fun, but he still couldn't understand what romance was. Meanwhile, Ruika was berating herself for not being able to do anything during the movie. It may not have been romance, but Poro realized something today. After 30 minutes, Poro suggested they go to karaoke and the girl was shocked that he didn't even break a sweat. She had no idea what he was made of and assumed he was the strongest demon for a reason, and this was extra proof of that. The guy smiled happily and said he was full. The girl asked to wait a bit and took a drink on the rocks. She suggested that the potion might not have worked and drank the whole glass. 3 seconds later, Ruika turned red and lay down on the table. Poro was scared for her, not realizing what was wrong. Ruika asked to forget about it and thought it worked just perfectly. While Ruika felt bad and closed her eyes, the hero noticed the poison mark on her arm and didn't understand why it was on her. The poison mark was a sign that the person had ingested a lethal amount of a poisonous potion. Ruika hadn't yet said that it was the most powerful poison in the demon world. It was the love potion that ended up killing her, and it was like a joke to her. She thought she was going to die now, but regardless, she wished she and Ruro could have a child. At some point, the shocked Ruika woke up from the Poro's kiss and opened her eyes. While she was trying to realize what had happened, Yuta whistled at such an amazing sight. Apparently, the hero had removed her deadly poison mark, which eventually disappeared from her hand. Poro admitted that he didn't know what the poison was, but he sucked it out of her mouth. It was an old demonic technique and she should be fine now. The hero hugged Ryuugaku and rejoiced for the fact that she was okay. As he pulled the girl against him, Ruika blushed and could no longer hold back. She struck her fist in the face of the Poro, after which she quickly ran away. The hero looked at her questioningly, trying to figure out what was wrong with her, since they hadn't sorted out the romance yet. But Yuta only sipped from his glass and thought about the fact that the Poro had already taught her everything. The protagonist looked around confusedly, trying to figure out where the Hanko utility bill was. The car that was behind him beeped and the guy was surprised that it warmed up so quickly. Today, for the first time in his life, Poro learned how hard it is to work part-time. There was a big line at the cash register, and each person was asking Poro for something. Some were just tired of waiting, and some asked for coffee. Some needed lottery tickets. The hero asked people to wait and apologized that the coffee machine was not working. Poro ended up at the store where Yuta worked. He informed him that they had a vacancy, and he along with Ryuugaku started their journey as helpers as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the Yuta serving the customers asked if they ate soup using chopsticks. It was a great chance for them to learn how to work in the human world. One woman was unhappy that the juice was already expired and the hero apologized, not knowing what to do about it. She said that the juice should be changed to new juice right away, and as soon as possible. The Poro's duties included the cash register, cleaning, customer service, arranging merchandise, ordering equipment, and preparing food. Such a large number of things that need to be done at the same time. The hero had grown up in the demon world for 10,000 years Sunday, so before that he had no idea what it was like to labor manually under such brutal conditions. He could undoubtedly say that it must have been like this during his training in the human world. Moreover, the Ryuugaku impressed him. She was very much like a veteran of this establishment. She apologized for the wait and handed the man his light box. She also brought a cup of iced coffee straight from the fridge. To another person, she served a hot drink and asked him to be careful with the boiling water. At the same time, she asked what address she should have put on the receipt. The guy thought that Ryuugaku had done this before, but the girl winked at him and called the vice a fool. After all, she was preparing to become his wife, so she considered it part of her training. Cooking, laundry, black magic, assassination, taming a dragon, helping at the store, and that was the least of what she was supposed to be able to do. It was scary for the hero to imagine what her idea of a wife really was. In the meantime, the men asked the Poro to move and the hero immediately got down to business. He didn't understand why he was the only one who remained useless here. 30 minutes later, the hero was completely exhausted. He never thought that being a store employee would be so hard. Yuta thought it would be much easier for them to deal with customers now and thanked his friends for their help. The girl said that she only helped at the request of the poor, so it wasn't worth thanking. The hero was upset because it seemed to him that because of his negligence a lot of good customers got angry. But Yuta didn't see it as a big deal and said that the guy entering the battle didn't need to be so worried. It was basically said that the customer was a god. It seemed to Yuta that the opinion from the store's side about the fair sale of goods was a problem. Plus, this sign was written by their manager. There are even a few constantly dissatisfied customers who misunderstood it. Poro listened to Yuta carefully and thought about what he said. Suddenly he seemed to glow and thought that this was a truly marvelous saying. After all, on this viewpoint lay the foundation of all human service. Ryuugaku was also surprised at such differences from the demon world. In the demon world, there were constantly dissatisfied customers and ate all the stores they didn't like. And every unpleasant customer was cooked by monsters, store assistants. Nevertheless, it was quite interesting both here and there. The hero decided to definitely take this idea to the demon world and wrote about it in his diary. Yuta noticed that the hero was thinking about something and asked Poro what was wrong. The guy replied that everything was fine. He was just thinking about the meaning of the word God. At that moment, a certain guy came into their store and asked them not to talk so aloofly. He said they were supposed to be serving customers as well as honoring him. The guy winked at the Poro and told him that he hadn't recorded him in a while. Yuta thought it was odd that a customer came in at such a time and told them they were closed. But judging from the faces of Ryuugaku and Poro, they knew the guy. The hero was shocked that a kamui came to them. The guy looked around, seeing the supermarket for the first time in hundreds of years as if nothing had happened. Kamui thought of something to eat and grabbed a rice ball from the shelf. Poro decided that the bastard had come to the human world on purpose to piss him off. Kamui took the onigiri and admitted that he had walked into this store completely by accident, and didn't even think that Poro was moonlighting here. But he asked not to worry about it and said that he would come right back after he made his purchases. After all he wanted to do was read and the weekly jump. The hero asked him not to be a jerk, and Yuta thought they knew each other because they were demons. But Poro said he was far worse than a demon. In this universe, in all three dimensions, in the human world, the demon world, and in heaven, Shirakami Kamui was a deity. This guy was a member of the heavenly top. Meanwhile, the Kamui was looking at one of the books and exclaimed that it was quite interesting. Yuta was shocked that the deity himself was in front of him and immediately remembered the god. It might have looked completely different at first glance, but the hero asked to take another look and see for himself. Kamui meanwhile was reading books at the speed of the wind and was already looking forward to the continuation. He used the divine reading skill and noticed that the last chapter of the One Piece was quite intense. The protagonist had been familiar with them since childhood through no fault of his own. Kamui constantly abused his miracle powers. Moreover, the protagonist was repeatedly harassed by him since his early childhood. Once he threw meteorites at him, another time he vaporized his clothes, and the third time he suddenly aged him. No matter how many times Poro returned the favor and no matter how hard he tried, for 2,000 years he was never able to change. Yuta did not understand what he was doing all this for and why he was pursuing the Poro. The hero didn't know and was clueless, but be that as it may, what he cared about was why it had crossed over to him again. Looking at the smirk of the Kamui, the hero understood everything. The guy smiled and said that he had power, but there was one thing he never got to keep, and that was the Poro. The hero was creepily pissed off by his cocky grin. His miracle powers were overshadowed by a truly bottomless magic. It's an extremely rare sight to see him enraged, however that's just part of the Demon King's power, and Kamui was madly in love with it. He was simply dying of curiosity, for he had never been able to see anything like this before this day, and he was looking forward to the new experience. But no matter where he went, the Kamui would never leave him alone. The boy contemplated how to mess with the hero today. As soon as he thought about it, the Ryuugaku struck the deity with all its strength and fleeting speed. Kamui noticed that Ryuugaku was in her usual hurry to unravel her arms, or rather at the moment her legs. She didn't like the fact that the bastard had come to bully the poor again, and said that she had come here to serve him. And if he harassed the hero again, she promised to finish the Kamui off. Kamui flew into the air and laughed, reminding her that the client was their god. He still held back her leg and said that he was both client and god. Ryuugaku was angry that there was nothing she could do and Poro asked the girl to stop. He said that he had severed his connection with the spirit world for the sake of coming to be trained in the human world, and he didn't want to bring the showdown from the demon world and heaven into the human world he loved. Nevertheless, this type is still a customer served as a god and the hero would want the guys to keep their hands to themselves. Kamui teased the girl and said that she as a helper was told off, but Ryuugaku ordered him to shut up before she punched him. Kamui really liked this attitude and asked the hero to hurry up. It also seemed to him that it was a good time to meet the resurrected ingredients. The deity smirked and apologized for his clumsiness. After that, all the ingredients began to come to life into bulls and pigs. Yuta was shocked when he noticed the grilled chicken suddenly came to life. Kamui asked the guys to wait a little longer until he fixes this, but before he does, he'll read this special edition of the Centennial Anniversary Jampa. While the Poro called the guy various words, Yuta worried about how they would stop the animals from coming out. Ryuugaku exclaimed that they would just re-grill them. Even the canned tuna came to life, which eventually turned into fish. There was even a bear in the store, but the guys didn't understand what it came out of. After Kamui closed the book, he smiled and said that it was quite fascinating. Looking at the whole mess in the store, he apologized for the wait. As Poro thought, he hadn't changed even after 2,000 years, and Yuta could only sympathize with him. Kamui told the guys that he was pumped in miracle powers and could now grant any living thing the sacred power of divine beasts. He asked them to notice that even as they were talking they were transforming, and if left unattended they would become savage. It seemed to Guy that such divine beasts were rampaging because they wanted to let off steam. At best, they would only sink all of Japan into the sea. Poro reprimanded the Kamui and said that in that case, he would drown with them. The hero grabbed the guy by his shirt and started shaking him, ordering him to fix it and do something. Kamui asked the hero how he treated his customers and the hero asked him more politely. Since they asked so, Kamui couldn't refuse them and returned things back to normal for a while. The guy decided to neatly put everything in a basket to carry the purchases home to heaven. The hero started punching his goods at the speed of light until they turned back and destroyed all of Japan. The guy admitted that he was having quite a bit of fun, but it was time to go home. Lastly, he also asked the Poro to warm up that rice ball for him. Just as Kamui thought, the Poro didn't get angry in the least. He really never would have thought that the demon heir could be so kind. Kamui said that today was fun and the hero put on his onigiri to warm up. But as soon as the microwave started, it suddenly glowed. The heroes couldn't understand what was wrong, because that rice ball glowed like it was ready to explode. The hero suggested that it was because the Kamui was holding it in his hands all the time. It was filled with divine power and really became an explosive onigiri. But the guy could calm them down and said that luckily he would only destroy the ground. Poro thought he was messing with them and asked for something to be done about it, but the Kamui replied that there was nothing he could do about it. Today, before coming here, he took a trip to the edge of the universe with his sister and then he ran out of gas. He asked to notice that his divine light bulb was already going out, but the hero exclaimed that he was lying and turned around in horror at the onigiri. Eventually there was an explosion, but for whatever reason all the heroes survived. Yuta and Ryuugaku opened their eyes trying to figure out what was wrong. Meanwhile, Kamui thought he was being played a joke on. The guy was shocked that Poro was able to absorb such a huge blob of energy. The hero became enraged and roughly grabbed the Kamui by his clothes. Looking into his demonic eyes, the Kamui thought he was about to die. But to his surprise, the hero told the dear customer that it was a defective product, so it should be replaced with a new one. But suddenly the hero fainted and his friends rushed to his rescue. Kamui smiled and admitted his defeat. It turns out that the Poro was much better than him as a deity. In the end, Kamui was satisfied with the service as a guest. Yuta and Ryuugaku calmed down when they were sure that the Poro was breathing. The next day, Kamui still came to their store as a customer. The hero didn't understand why he came back, since he thought he had already had a good time. But the guy had not previously said that he would not come again. Besides, he had personally cured the vice. The hero reminded him that it was all because of him, and Kamui asked him for one onigiri. Kamui gave the hero 100 yen and left the Poro alone. Poro woke up on a quiet morning when a dark-haired girl woke him up and asked the hero to wake up or he would be late. The surprised hero stared at the girl. At some point, he shouted away from her and the girl said that his breakfast was ready. She hoped he slept well and needed to put his futon away soon. Also, Yuta herself had been expecting him for quite some time. The hero looked around and tried to realize where he was. His heart raced frantically and he tried to remember what had happened earlier. Yesterday, due to a building remodeling or something like that, he was kicked out of his apartment and thus became a homeless demon cub. However, he was spotted by Yuta Dono when he was coming back from school and offered to go to his place. Thus, the Poro was allowed to live here doing nothing and yet for free. The hero inspected the house and was delighted with it. The girl brought the Yuta plate and the lad thanked her. The hero couldn't get enough of this Japanese house. Certainly, it reflected Japanese traditions, the aesthetic sense of taste of the Japanese. It was all a true work of art for the Poro. Absorbing his breakfast, Yuta told the lad that it was just a huge house and nothing more. But the guy still thought it was marvelous, and he never would have thought that Yuta lived in such an elegant house. The dark-haired girl smiled at the hero and said that the Hitoshi family had owned the building for generations and were a leading trading company. Moreover, Yuta himself was the son and heir of the current head. Yuta finished his breakfast and said that this fish was delicious. Thus, the first friend of Poro was unexpectedly the child of an influential family. As the future heir, he had to face things like real estate, shipbuilding, heavy industry, as well as other things from the field. The father of the current head had headed very high expectations for him, so Yuta had a very hard time. Yuta turned to Nanaka with a smile and thought she should have apologized. The girl apologized and said that she was rather rude. The hero didn't understand what was wrong and looked at Yuta and then back at her. Yuta said that no matter how you looked at it, it was still an old building, though it was big. They had quite a few empty rooms, so the hero could choose anyone he liked. Yuta also reminded him that he was still an exchange student and it was like living with a family, so he could ask them for help. By the way, Yuta warned that it was a very old building and there was a chance that a ghost lived there. So when Poro went to the bathroom at night, he might not be scared of him. Although the guy thought that it was usual for him, and he wouldn't be afraid of such trifles. The hero exclaimed that of course he wouldn't be scared. But suddenly the threshold jumped in place when someone behind them abruptly opened the doors. The man charged the Ute from the threshold for the color of his hair. The man named Hitoshi Yuzan turned out to be the 10th head of the company and Yuta's father. He ordered that he would have everything back to the way it was by the next time he returned and hoped the trashy boy understood him. Poro glanced fearfully at Yuta, who was absolutely undeterred. Yuta didn't understand why their problem decided to show up right now. His father noticed a certain boy sitting next to him, and the girl said that it was a classmate of Yuta's. For some reason he would be living here from today, and it became clear to the father. Yuta's father shook the boy's hand and said they had plenty of rooms so he could use anyone he liked. He introduced himself as the fool's father and said it was a pleasure to meet him. The hero felt uncomfortable and returned the favor. His father also noticed that at first glance he was just an ordinary boy, but he had the aura of an experienced adult in his eyes, and he liked that. By the way, he of course did not yet know that he was talking to a demon that was 2,000 years old. Yuta's father wanted to ask the boy what his purpose was, but the hero couldn't exactly answer his question. Perhaps it was his father's job, but the hero wasn't sure he would succeed at it. The man thought it was wonderful and wanted to know what the Poro's father's job was. The hero tried to evade the answer and said he was above people or something like that. Yuta's father understood and assumed that he was a manager like him. Poro replied that this was not quite true, but almost true. Yuta's father thought that he would easily succeed in his father's job, and that was fine. However, he wished he could go back to their fool Yuta. One day he would be the head of the company, but that didn't stop him from loafing around all day. Even worse, because of all the constant fighting he was given a shameful nickname, and he was just a disgrace to the name of their family. The man thought he had gone to a lot of trouble to organize the company. After finishing his breakfast, Yuta put his plate on the table and said that he sometimes came home to lecture, and if anyone met his formidable face, he would immediately die of boredom. His father became furious, and this atmosphere between his son and father stirred the poor. Yuta reached out and suggested that his friend go to school, for he was already bored with this business fool. This was the rage and tension that came from his father. The father grabbed the bamboo sword from his companion and struck his son in the face with it. He could not allow Yuta to interrupt his parent and asked him to repeat what he heard from his mouth. Yuta fell to the floor from the blow, thus frightening the Poro. But he quickly regained his senses and punched his father in the face with his fist. He did not understand how this man could be a parent who was beating his own son with a bamboo sword. He thought he had no honor and was unworthy to take the sword in his hands. The girls tried to subdue them, and apparently this was not the first time they had fought. Meanwhile, the Poro didn't understand what was going on here at all. The father and son were grudgingly calling each other all sorts of obscene words. The girl asked the two of them to stop immediately. She shouted so loudly that the Poro jerked from its seat again. It was the Yuzen's wife and the Yuta's mother. She reminded them that they were being stared at and decided they should be ashamed of it. They were both adults, but they were behaving inappropriately. The angry Yuta said he would be at school and they would deal with him later. His father headed for the exit and said that was fine, because when he got back he would soap up his neck. Lastly, he said that the kid might have been writing a suicide note. The woman didn't know what to make of them and only exhaled tiredly. But they couldn't do anything about it because these two always acted like this. The girls whispered amongst themselves and said that this happened all the time. As soon as these two met, if the mistress didn't separate them, they wouldn't calm down. Her friend asked her to keep her voice down because they could be heard. Yuta's mother decided to just ignore it. The character approached the distraught woman and assumed that she was Yuta's mother. Hiro remembered that he had not introduced himself earlier and apologized. He introduced himself as Yuta's friend and gave his name. But for some reason the girl looked at him in surprise. She came to her senses and apologized and thanked him for always looking out for Yuta. But the hero thought he was the one who should have thanked them. The woman smiled and introduced herself with the name Sumair. She was sorry that she could not greet him yesterday as she was absent. She had heard about their conversation and assumed that the hero would be staying with them from today. Sumair realized that it might have seemed strange for a first meeting, but she wished Poro would listen to her. The thing is, she had a small favor to ask of him. Something needed to be done about these two, and she could only ask him to do it. She asked the Poro to listen to one story of hers. At school, the hero was waiting for Ryuugaku that tried to feed him all the time, but the hero couldn't fit anymore. The girl pulled sticks to him and asked him to eat this sausage. People had couples in love making bento for each other to express their love. The girl said that she tried very hard and made all these love bentos, so he had to eat all of them. But first of all, the hero tried to remind him that she was not his wife. Besides, his stomach was already very bloated from her love. But there was still more to come, and Ryuugaku asked him to shut up and savor the taste. It seemed unbelievable to Yuta that she was able to cook it all by herself. Yuta decided to try it and said it was real yummy, but Ryuugaku ordered him not to dare eat it. She said he had eaten dried squid and called Yuta names. Yuta wished she would make a love bento for him next time, but the Ryuugaku could only give him one bite. While they were talking, the hero remembered the early history of Yuta's mother. Her husband was a very busy man. He worked in the company of their family even while they slept. Once when she was hospitalized, he never visited her once. Once he even left a family outing. But still it took a lot of effort for this man not to feel pain. However, they overlooked the fact that it was much more difficult for a child to accept such things. Their child had to realize that her husband worked for all of them, and there was probably no way to help him forgive someone who forgot about his family. Today she was able to stop their fight, but no one knew if it would happen again. Perhaps something worse could happen. That was why Yuta's mother wanted to do something before it happened. In this case, as his friend, Poro wanted to help Yuta and asked for permission to call someone else to help. The woman felt that she shouldn't, as it was quite personal. She was going to ask him again as soon as he got home, so she asked him to keep their conversation a secret until now, especially from Yuta. She wanted to do everything she could to keep these two from doing something worse, and the hero was in complete agreement with her. The hero ended up in a real fight between father and son. It seemed to him that this situation had gotten worse beyond belief. The father told his son that he had to leave immediately afterward for a meeting, and he should be grateful to him for wasting his time on him. And if he wins, he can never go out again. But if he wins the Yuta will never dare cross the threshold of this house again. The hero tried to stop his friend and not to do it in any way, but the boy asked his father to attack. The father said that nevertheless, if he suddenly loses, Poro can stay here, and asked his son to attack. The hero was at a loss and did not know how to stop them. Both were sure that the truth would be for him, and they came together in a fierce sword fight. The father believed that a milksop like his son could not win this fight. Now Yuta thought his old man must be out of his mind. At that moment the door opened and Poro noticed the mother of the Yuta. Poro was at a loss and asked the woman how to stop them. The girl said that it had happened sooner than she had anticipated, but there was nothing that could be done about it anymore. They were both very strong, so nothing would happen to them for a while. Yuta's mother asked to follow her, because if he got it, they would succeed. Poro didn't understand what she was talking about, but she couldn't say it now and asked him to hurry. During the fight, both opponents stopped to catch their breath. Yuta noticed that his father was getting old, and with this advantage, he would soon overpower him. But his father thought that his son was just a milksop who had not even become a full member of society. Each was going to end this right now for his own reason, and their swords swung at each other. But suddenly a porpoise appeared right in front of them that took their blows in stride. Yuta and his father looked in surprise at the Poro, who was not hurt by their blows at all. He only said that he saw something here by chance and took out a piece of paper from his pocket. It was a very important thing for them to see, and that was why he had to intervene. In this picture, their whole family was together and they were very happy. His father didn't realize where he got this picture. It was a photo from the first time they all went to an amusement park together, but right after that, his physical condition became very bad. So this is the most recent photo of their family from that time. It became clear to the hero why everyone around him ignored him. From the very beginning, only he could see it, as he possessed strong magical powers. Yuta's mother thought she was scaring him and apologized for keeping quiet about it. But thanks to him she was able to communicate her feelings to the two. Of course the hero was cowardly, but ghostly bodies were not such scary things. Sometimes it happens that a very strong feeling turns into a magical power, and allowed the soul to stay in this world longer. And because of her strong feelings for Yuta Dono, Poro was able to meet her. Moreover, he was able to know the real depth of a human being, for which he was grateful to her. The vanishing mother soul thanked the Poro, for if they had not gotten along so quickly, she would not have been able to leave. Lastly, she asked to take care of the two of them, after which she left. After all that happened, Yuta wondered how the hero found their picture. He and his father thought it had been lost long ago. But a secret had to remain a secret, so the hero could not answer him. But Yuta did not understand him. Yuta suggested that his friend go to school, but his father called out to his son. He asked them to be careful on their way to school, and Poro thanked his father for his concern. After everything happened, the hero made notes in his diary. He believed that family is the invisible to the eye feelings that are always with them. The main character, along with his friends, came to a place where there was quite a lot of noise and people. Poro was thrilled that there was soccer, tennis, billiards, and archery. There was quite a selection here that Poro had never encountered before, and all of these fun activities were in the human world. Personally, Yuta, in order to stretch himself, would play baseball for starters. Poro grabbed Ryuugaku's hand and asked him to watch it. He suggested they run up to the food court first, but then wondered where to go afterward. The girl got angry and called the guy names, saying that he grabbed her hand sharply. Poro marveled that she might have disliked something. Ryuugaku blanched, not knowing what to say back, but most likely it was just a surprise to her. But at some point, a girl ran up to Poro, pushed Ryuugaku away with her foot and grabbed the hero in a tight embrace. The long-haired girl was very happy to see them. It had been quite a while since they had seen each other, but she could see that Poro was in good health. Poro was shocked to meet a girl named Nanno here. Nanno had heard that Poro herself lived in the human world, so she decided to pay them a visit as well. Yuta immediately realized that she must have been one of his friend Poro's non-human friends. Ryuugaku was angry that this girl had finally shown herself. Poro introduced Yuta to his childhood friend. She was an angel named Nanna, and was also part-time Kamui's younger sister. The girl smiled at Yuta and admitted that it was nice to meet him. Yuta didn't understand who they were talking about, and Poro reminded Yuta of the guy that came to their store. It was the same god with a terrible temper. Remembering him, Yuta was shocked that such a girl could be his little sister and thought he was being played a joke on. Nanna was embarrassed. She said that her brother had caused them a lot of trouble the other day. Honestly, Yuta couldn't even believe that the battered type had such a cute little sister. Poro laughed and said that he had a hard time believing it too. Nevertheless, she was a very kind child who had protected the Poro from the hands of gods and demons since ancient times. MANHWA confirmed that this was pure truth, because she had always admired Poro herself as her older brother. She heard from her brother that Poro herself was temporarily living in the human world. Although her brother was fooling around doing all these silly things, she was touched by how lofty and deep their thinking was. Though a little, the girl wanted to help, and after leaving the heavens she immediately came here. She asked the Poro to let her join and spend this day with them. The guy stroked her head and happily agreed. He decided that they were sure to have fun today all together and suggested that they start soon. Nana also happily raised her hand and called out the Poro herself. At some point, the girl's hand began to turn into many sharp vines, but the Poro didn't see it behind his back. As Yuta watched in shock at the angel's sudden attack, her spikes went straight into Poro's back. But the happy hero ran forward, wondering which game they should start with. Meanwhile, the cold-blooded Rika stopped the Nana's strike and looked at her smiling face. Ryuugaku told the girl that she was sneakily attacking back as usual, and threatened to keep a close eye on her. She called Nana a nasty pretender and Nana laughed back, admitting that it was a rather unexpected encounter. She asked her not to equal her with a vulgar girl like Ryuugaku. Ryuugaku asked the Yudu to get ready, for this girl had wanted to take the life forces of the Poro for like 1,000 years. Yuta was quite surprised, but the Poro had no idea of Nana's plans. Ryuugaku said that this time was no different either. She had come to beat him to death and then hide in the commotion that had risen. Angel laughed and said that an expression like beating him to death sounded a little too rough for her, and the reason she was doing it was even deeper than the sea. Nana remembered what was happening to her about 1,000 years ago. She kept admiring the hero's picture, at those kindness-filled and submissive round cute pupils, and that cute little animal-like mouth. Her whole room was literally littered with different pictures of the hero, and she wished that the dear Poro himself would marry her, even though she was the younger sister of the Kamui. But all these secretly taken pictures really alarmed him. He had to tell her that he didn't see anything wrong with it. But anyway, a demon and an angel couldn't get married. The girl suggested that she could use her divine powers, but the guy replied that it was just the laws of heaven. So to be serious, she needed to be reborn. It was a pretty sad story for a Nane. In any case, since they could be related, then at least no one else would steal it. Nana squeezed his portrait so hard that the glass of the frame began to crack. Otherwise, she would have to kill him with her own hands. With these thoughts, Nana finally crushed the frame with the image of the Poro and crumpled the glass like paper. Kamui told his sister that if she was banished, it would upset her brother very much. She didn't want to commit murder in such a vulgar form, so she would try to kill him in such a way that he wouldn't even have time to realize anything. Nana flew up into the sky and asked the Poro himself to wait for her. Kamui replied that if she killed the Poro, he could even be resurrected as an angel. That's why for 1,000 years, she pursued the Poro himself with the goal that he would die fighting alone. Even if she only said it to herself, she believed with all her heart that he would continue to live, and that was truly sincere love. Yuta could agree with Rika, that God or angel was a true tin to them. Nana felt that if Rika had not interfered, she would have accomplished her goal long ago, and asked why she kept interfering with her. Ryuugaku did not understand what kind of marriage she could talk about if she was going to kill her husband. Nana thought and suggested that if it was someone as strong as her, it would be okay, and suggested Ryuugaku to sleep with her brother. But the girl shouted that she didn't want a Shiramura with such a heavenly asshole. Nana speculated that the image of her brother might have impenetrably cut right into her brain and apologized for that. Poro noticed that the boys were still in their seats and suggested that they hurry up or there would be no seats left. Nana immediately perked up and grabbed Poro's hand. She smiled sweetly and said that she and the guys were having a bit of a chat, then suggested they move on. Angel turned to the others and said that if they were going to interrupt her, they could feel free to do so. But she didn't think they could do that, and Poro looked questioningly at the guys. By the way, Nana reminded Yuta herself that what they were talking about was a secret, and otherwise she would have to shut their mouths. The friends decided to play a game of billiards, but Poro started having tears after a while. He didn't understand why he wasn't doing well. For some reason, all the balls didn't want to go in, so Yuta suggested that Poro just give up. Looking at the pile of balls on top of each other, Yuta had a feeling that even if he wanted to, he wouldn't be able to get them into the hole. It was also unclear to him how this could even happen. Poro said to Nana that it was her turn, but the girl thought that if even he couldn't do it, it wouldn't be realistic for her at all. With those words, she hit the cue balls with frantic force. The blow was so powerful and fast that the ball flew out of the table and started flying all over the place. Several balls ended up aiming right at Poro, and Ryuugaku told Nana. Ryuugaku threw her cue at the balls and impaled them like it was a meat skewer. Poro only noticed that Nana had apparently driven all the balls at once and exclaimed that it was unbelievable. Besides, she had driven them as if they were ordinary balls. Meanwhile, Yuta looked up and saw the balls pinned to the wall with a cue. He thought that this was indeed a fierce fight between two people. After that, the girls' dangerous games continued. Each time they fought on darts, roller skates, soccer, and baseball. After 5 hours, the already exhausted girls started tennis. Nana wiped away her sweat and said that if she was successful in this event, she would accept her last words with open arms. Yuta thought it was only a doubles game, though anything was possible with them. Watching the girls from the sidelines, Ro couldn't understand why they were competing so desperately. Ryuugaku was infuriated by Nana's words and threatened her that she would finish her off immediately. Nana's shoulder blades crunched and then her long angel wings emerged from them. This was fine for her, because she was a little tired of all this, and it was time to get serious and stop this spectacle. At breakneck speed, the angel threw the ball directly at the head of the spawn, who apparently hadn't even expected it. Ryuugaku didn't even realize it as the ball flew past her and into the hero's side. She didn't even notice the impact and looked back in horror. Angel smiled and reminded her that she was only number 2 in heaven. It was only her deep love that she put into that ball. It was enough for her when Ryuugaku only hesitated for a moment. Angel recalled that the hero was number 1 among demons, so she decided to make 2 more throws just in case. But at that moment, she noticed the Ryuugaku blocking her path, and was about to use her powers. Nana smiled and told the girl that she was a stupid creature. She knew she only needed this man to give birth to a strong child. She saw no point in risking her own life to protect him. But Rika exclaimed that she didn't care about the conception of the child or its strength. But if it concerned the Poro, it was very simple here. The girl unleashed her powers and her fists erupted in bright flames. Ryuugaku's face turned red and she boldly confessed that she loved the Poro. After that, Ryuugaku remembered nothing, but as soon as she opened her eyes, she saw the Poro in front of her. Poro told the surprised Rika that she had overdone it while playing and had passed out. It could have been very dangerous there if he hadn't stopped it. Moreover, Ryuugaku suddenly fainted and was very cold after being hit. The girl realized in horror that she had used up too much magic power. She immediately wondered what had happened to the Nana, but to her surprise, she had just gone home early. Poro told Ryuugaku that she had asked her to give her one message. She had no idea that a demon could know anything about love. Ryuugaku had to treasure the love that was in her life. This time Nana decided to back out. However, Ryuugaku should not have thought that this was the end. Someday she intended to return, but until that day, she asked Ryuugaku to keep her happy. Poro didn't quite understand what it all meant. By the way, Poro didn't quite hear what she had recently yelled. His mind was a little foggy, but the girl was embarrassed and said she didn't say anything. Ryuugaku told the Poro that he was just imagining things. Yuta, who was watching from the sidelines, understood everything and only smiled enigmatically. Ryuugaku didn't understand such pranks from Nana and thought that she would never forgive her for it. But still, even considering the fact that they were enemies, it was surprising to her. The next day, a new student named Shirakami Nano-san was welcomed to the school. The evil Ryuugaku asked not to be told that it was the same distant day that Nana had previously told her about. Nano grinned and couldn't recall talking about something like that earlier. Ryuugaku clenched her fists and prepared to nail her on the spot. The next morning, the protagonist was faced with another annoying prank by Kamui in the mirror. While he was brushing his teeth, Kamui put a seal on him and thought it would inspire the spawn. He invented a demonic seal that suppressed magical power. Now the hero could be in the state of a normal human, but the Poro understood nothing at all. Kamui appeared out of nowhere and stuck some strange thing on his forehead, and the thing wouldn't even come off his face. Kamui smiled and explained that this seal absorbed his powers, so it was impossible to remove it. However, there was one way that people could tell him, but Kamui decided that would be in the next program. Poro Yarsely slapped the Kamui and ordered him to talk business, not make a jerk of himself. Suddenly, the hero was in so much pain that he fell to the floor and the Kamui asked him to be more careful. After all, if an ordinary man hit a god, he might break his arm. For the first time in centuries, the Poro felt pain. He looked at his throbbing arm, still not believing that he had become human. Kamui hoped the hero enjoyed his little prank, prepared by him with love. Kamui said goodbye then disappeared, but the threshold asked him to wait. Poro looked at his watch and thought that if his body was like a normal human, he had to hurry. He ran outside with a piece of unfinished toast and Yuta's father wished the boy a happy journey. Usually Poro could sleep until the last minute as he reached the end of the run in 3 seconds, but now Yuta had gone ahead of him. The hero had to run to the station and get on the train. He didn't even notice how a girl on a bicycle was riding towards him and asked him to be careful. She didn't have time to brake and hit the Poro, which flew back a couple of meters. The frightened girl apologized and hoped he was okay. The Poro didn't even notice her and at some point realized everything. Not only his physical abilities but also his reaction with perception became like a human. Before, for him, avoiding a speeding train was like not stepping on an ant. But now he had to be more careful. Now to him, even this woman's bicycle was like a tank or a demonic general. Poro would never have thought that the human body was so delicate. The girl was worried and offered to call an ambulance, but the hero refused. Besides, it was his own fault for jumping out in front of her, so she might not be worried. The hero realized that if he wasn't careful, he wouldn't last long like this. Kamui had stuck him with the problematic thing, however, Poro seemed like he knew how to get rid of it. He ran on, thinking about the fact that it had to be done somehow. Poro didn't understand why his breathing was quickening so fast. Poro was waiting for a transfer at the station, but he had absolutely no idea where he needed to go. He compared this subway to the sea of wilting flowers that was in their demon world. In addition, it was rush hour now, so it was difficult for the hero to even turn around. The whole thing reminded him of the vise of a Gudokong. It was also a strong and large creature in their demon world. It wasn't funny at all for Poro when he told his friends at school about everything. He used to like the seriousness of the human world, but now his opinion might have changed. Yuta knew that things were not as easy as they might have seemed to him at first glance. Nana apologized for making her older brother uncomfortable again. But as his sister, she was ready to take full responsibility and prepared her weapon in the form of a sword. Ryuugaku thought she wanted to get her neck slapped right there, and Nana admitted that it had completely slipped her mind. However, Nana felt bad that there was absolutely no point in their marriage now. Ryuugaku got angry and asked her to repeat what she had said. The half-living porpoise said that they would certainly not be able to conceive a strong child in this condition, and now he was not fit for marriage and asked Ryuugaku to forgive him. Ryuugaku wanted desperately to hold his hands and tell him that it wasn't like that, and that she loved him even though he was weak. But right now she was very embarrassed and couldn't answer him anything. Nana smirked, not understanding how she could be such a heartless girl. Ryuugaku cursed that damned angel and promised to send her to hell someday. This was the first time Yuta had heard of such a thing as a demonic seal, let alone that there was a way to find out about it in the human world. Nana thought that Yuta as a human could give them some idea, but Yuta didn't know anything about it. Suddenly he remembered something and was glad. In their world, many stories required a kiss from a loved one to break a curse, after which the curse would immediately lift. Poro was glad that with such a fabulous way, he wouldn't even have to fight. But then he saw two terrifying girls in front of him. Ryuugaku thought that this was a good way to get this thing off and she would really like to try it out. Nana also smiled and told Poro that her deep kiss would be so hot that his heart would melt. Poro was horrified and said that it was too much for a kiss. The hero ran with all his legs, but the mad girls ran after him, demanding their lips from him. Nana was counting on a sincere deep kiss, but the Poro was terrified. Running away, he shouted that the two would devour him. The guy managed to escape into the city at some point and the girls started fighting. Ryuugaku yelled at Nana that she had lost sight of the hero because of her. She was afraid that she wouldn't be able to return to normal, but Nana thought that she just wanted to get his kiss. Ryuugaku screamed that she wasn't. Meanwhile, the Poro watched them from the corner. Out of haste, he ran into the first building he could find, and he thought it was a good decision. Poro decided that he would just wait here while the two talked. The hero was startled by a girl who approached him from behind. She addressed him as a visitor and said that if he didn't have a seat, he could order one here and they would find one for him. The hero looked around and saw a bunch of tables with people in front of him. He remembered reading about this place in a book. It must have been a cafe, or rather a place to rest. The girl smiled and said they were having a spring promotion this week, walnut and tea syrup toppings for free. They also had low-calorie chocolate chip cookies and vanilla cream frappuccinos taken from them frequently. An orange mochaccino with 2 optional sauces. And if he brought his own glass, he got a 10% discount. Poro didn't understand why this girl had such crazy words and figured she was casting some kind of spell. The girl politely asked him to take his time and left. The guy sadly sat down at the table and thought that such orders took a lot of energy when he was alone. He didn't know how to order at Starbucks and decided he knew rather little about the world. In any case, he managed to kill some time here somehow. While Poro was drinking his drink, he was approached by a group of guys. They noticed that he looked like a foreign student and wanted to have some fun with him. Poro couldn't even imagine what would happen. They pushed the guy out of the establishment like a little kid and laughed, thanking him for the money. One of the guys suggested he play a little more. They noticed that the vice had a notebook under his clothes. One of the offenders took it out and stepped on the notebook with his foot. His partner said that the Poro's wallet belonged in a landfill. At this point, Poro thought that as much as he hated the demon world, he still found himself captured by its devilish power. He didn't particularly understand the human world, but today, practically in one day, he had come to know it, and this world had become hateful to Poro. Without even realizing his bad qualities, Poro saw only good in people. In addition, he didn't understand who the exchange student was, not to mention he had developed an overly selfish way of thinking. It seemed to Poro that this might be a great chance for him to experience life as an exchange student. With these thoughts, he reached for his notebook. One of the boys noticed Poro reaching for his notebook and smirked. But suddenly a certain voice ordered the guys not to dare step on it. It was Yuta who kicked the group leader off his leg and ordered him not to step on the thing that was dear to his friend. Yuta smiled at the poor and apologized for taking so long. From the force of his blow, the offending man fell to the ground and the Poro looked at his friend in surprise. Yuta took the notebook that the Poro held so dear and gave it back to them. He managed to get it back before they ruined it, but it was still a little shabby. But the Poro's troubles did not end there. A huge hole appeared in the sky and a bunch of different demons started flying out of it. They had already heard rumors that their prince had lost his magic power, and apparently it was true. The demons wanted to finish him off quickly and become the Demon King. They were sure that today would be the end of the spawn. In the crowd of demons, there were various ranks from the 100th to the 10,000th. Yuta cheered up and said that it was fine. Since they had come here, he was ready to fight back and exclaimed that he would not give them Poro. Poro told Yuta Dono that this was madness. Besides, humans could not fight against demons, and Yuta reassured his friend by saying that he was not a fool. He didn't care if he won or not, but Yuta wanted to try because he was protecting his friend. Neither physical nor magical power could harm someone whose heart is truly strong. It was the very human charm that Poro had desired all these years. The hero slammed his palm on the ground. He felt ashamed that he had given up so quickly. He needed the strength to protect this amazing man. With these thoughts, his seal on his forehead began to fizzle and disappear. The demons were already approaching the guys and told the prince to get ready. But suddenly they froze in place in surprise as a blinding light began to emanate from the Poro. The demonic hand of the hero that called the demons as pitiful insects showed up. The look of the Poro changed considerably, who was furious that these demons dared to reach out their paws to his friend. He promised that they would regret coming into existence. In his hands was a ball of energy, which he unleashed upon the demons. The powerful wave of energy swept away all the demons in an instant, leaving Yuta shocked. Meanwhile, Kamui was watching the hero from the sky and he found it quite interesting. He laughed and recognized that this guy was incredible. He got rid of the seal with such unbridled magical power. Even though he had suppressed his powers, he was able to awaken them by sheer will alone, just like back then hundreds of years ago. Inside the spawn, the other demonic personality of the Demon King slept, and when he transmitted the magical energy for the demonic shot, he was not fully awakened. For the sake of protecting someone else, this guy changed and became another personality he hated. Although it was possible to break the seal in a simpler way with a very common remedy in the human world called vinegar. Well, of course, the hero wouldn't have guessed that the human stuff could help against the magical stuff. But he managed on his own despite the Kamui's hints. After that, Kamui started to think what nasty thing to do next time, as suddenly the sky seemed to be torn apart by the demonic hands of the Poro. The next day, the hero came down with a cold. Ruika blushed with embarrassment and admitted that she had seen everything. She thought the Poro was incredibly cool, but the Yuta didn't understand her pathos speech. The hero didn't understand anything and it all embarrassed him terribly. He covered his face with his hands and wished he could just disappear. Nana said viciously that she had brought him some apples, but Rika asked her next time to at least try to cover up the smell of poison before bringing them. Poro shuddered and felt like sneezing, but his demonic sneeze was so strong that it pierced the roof of the house. One night, when the protagonist went to buy himself an ice cream cone, something happened. He ran into a real demon. The guy who was smoking a cigarette told the battered guys that they had prevented him from enjoying the evening's booze. And now, in all likelihood, he would have to lap up that booze from the ground. Poro noticed that this guy was wearing his school's uniform, even though it was scuffed and wrinkled. The guy lifted one of the beaten men up and said that he had signed his own death warrant when he got between him and his drink. Smoking a cigarette, the assailant was about to strike when suddenly his fist stopped the Poro. The guy didn't know Poro and ordered him to get off. Poro said that he drinks alcohol, smokes tobacco, and uses brute force. The hero thought this would lead to nothing good and wished he would stop. In response, the guy grabbed the hero's hand and squeezed it tightly. He threatened the vice that his head was the hardest in this world and he was ready to show the hero what brute force meant. With these words, he struck the Poro head on with all his might. Without further ado, the bully immediately fell to the ground unconscious and the hero thought there was nothing he could do about it. He had the hardest head among the demons and the Poro thought he had won again. After a while, the injured man came to his senses and saw the Poro in front of him. He jumped out of bed and tried to realize where he was. The hero smiled and said that he had slept for quite some time and called him lazy. Poro asked him to wait while he went to get water, but to his surprise the bully bowed his head to him. Poro didn't understand what was wrong, but this guy was really shocked by the hero's strength and said he was pretty strong. But Poro was even more surprised when the guy asked to take him on as an apprentice. The next day, everyone was just talking about the apprentice named Demon. Some didn't know that many people were afraid of him and didn't understand the reason. There were rumors that he was evil and ruthless like a real demon and fought all the time. No one wanted to mess with him because it was more expensive. That's why they called this guy a demon. The disciples noticed that the demon was smiling and thought that he was in anticipation that he was going to beat the little Poro. Meanwhile, the hero didn't understand why this was happening to him. The demon's name was Kimura, and he wanted to carry Poro's bag, but the hero said he could handle it himself. The guys passing by called Poro a poor little squirt and thought the imp would kick his ass. One of the guys asked his friend to shut up. Kimura gave them a defiant look and the guys tried to run away as fast as possible. Poro asked to stop calling him teacher. After all, he was the one who was supposed to learn from people, not the other way around. But Kimura didn't understand what his teacher was talking about. Poro had knocked him out with a single blow and it seemed incredibly cool to him. And now Kimura wanted to be near Poro all the time to learn the secrets of his power. Poro thought this was nonsense and asked Kimura why he admired physical strength so much. After all, besides it, in the human world there is also the power of friendship and love. Kimura thought about it and answered that he had no special reason. But nevertheless, he thought it was pretty cool to feel the strongest. An intimidating smile appeared on Kimura's face. It seemed surprising to Poro that the values of the demon world could be relevant among humans as well. The human world he lived in was multifaceted and all sorts of things could be seen in it. But this was too much for him. The hero noticed a little girl by a tree that asked Mai Tian to be careful. The girl was talking to a small kitten that was stuck in a tree and apparently couldn't get down on its own. It was only meowing pitifully and the girl didn't know what to do. Poro easily plucked the whole tree from the root and bent it in front of the astonished girl. The shocked cat also jumped off the tree right into the girl's hands. The girl was glad that Mai Ryan was okay. While she was hugging the cat, the guy looked around hoping no one saw it and put the tree back up. But then he heard the Kimura calling for his teacher. Poro had managed to forget about the guy calling him his teacher. Kimura apparently realized how his teacher was training and tried to move the tree. But only he noticed that he was too weak to do so. Looking at him from the sill, it looked like he had really lost his mind. The girl ran up to the Poro and thanked her brother for his help. She held out a certain item to her and Kimura as a thank you. It was candy, after which the girl waved goodbye and ran away. Suddenly Poro thought of something and looked at Kimura. He suggested moving on to the second training session and a satisfied Kimura told the teacher that he was always up for it. As the guys headed off to do their own thing, they didn't see that not far away from them, a group of guys were following them. Kimura couldn't imagine what his teacher would come up with. Poro decided that since he was the teacher, he would only teach Kimura all that was good and kind. Poro put the old man on his arm on the subway and said that they would exercise his muscles using other people as dumbbells. Rani thanked the tense Kimura for trying to hold her. There were too many people here, and thanks to them they could ride sitting down. But physical ability wasn't an indicator yet, and they started the next training session. Poro said they would balance on the edge of the roof while practicing balance. The frightened man that Poro was holding thought he shouldn't have committed this suicide. Next, they had to go into the burning houses so that their lungs and skin would not be afraid of the heat, and carry the injured people out of there. As Poro thought, a different kind of strength was valued in the human world. After their rigorous training, the boys sat down on a bench to rest. Poro smiled at Kimura and said that they had done a good job for today. Kimura tried to catch his breath and grimly said he would do anything to get stronger. He pulled out the candy the girl had given them and couldn't understand this strange feeling. He was doing all this just to get stronger. But all those people he helped spoke sincerely and thanked them for their help. Kimura didn't understand what it was and Poro asked the guy what was the matter. After that, the satisfied hero unwrapped the candy wrapper, but it slipped out of his hands. Poro jumped up and ran after the candy, which rolled on the ground. Kimura meanwhile popped the sour candy into his mouth and thought he was sorry. While Poro was gone, a stranger approached Kimura. Even though Poro's candy was stained, the hero smiled and said it was quite tasty. As he approached the bench, Poro did not see Kimura on it and looked around. A couple of people that had caught up to the Kimura hit the guy for the 50th time, and again exactly on target. The attacker congratulated his partner and said it was pretty exciting. Going to do it again. The battered Kimura only breathed heavily and wiped his smashed lips with his sleeve. Even though he was a demon, they were able to find his weak spot. The guys smirked and asked, thanking the kitten they had in their hands. Kimura looked at the kitten that Poro had saved earlier. The attackers held a knife to the cat, but Kimura asked them not to touch him. He allowed himself to be hit at least 100 times. He didn't care as long as they let this kitten go. He got to his feet and looked fearlessly at the guy with the bat. The gang leader grinned and offered the guys a glance at his defiant look. As punishment, he was happy to give that bat a good smack on his face. Kimura remembered the girl's happy face and smiled. But to Kimura's surprise, Poro got there in time and stopped the bat at his face. Poro was able to effortlessly take away the bat that started to melt in his hands. He bent it like plasticine and said that sometimes even a true hero could use a teacher's help. Looking into the eyes of the Poro, all three attackers were horrified. Before their eyes, the Poro turned their baseball bat into a small black ball. The boys screamed and rushed away, shouting to the Poro that he was a real demon. More Kimura couldn't stand on his feet and started to fall, but Poro caught him. The hero told him that he was very strong to withstand such a thing. After a while, Poro and Kimura found a crying girl sitting on a bench and told her that they had brought her a Mai Tian. The girl hugged her kitten and Kimura asked her never to lose her kitten again. Kimura didn't expect her to hug him in gratitude for looking for her kitten despite its terrible wounds. Kimura didn't know how to react to that and looked at the poor confused. Poro winked at Kimura, and Kimura replied to the girl that it was nothing, because he was strong. After that day, Kimura stopped pushing even in crowds. He had gotten stronger, but a couple of his habits would do them good now. A woman screamed in the streets of a city at night. The girl saw a terrible creature in front of her and fell to the ground in horror. She was killed, and on her bloody hand was carved a pentagram with the number 23. The school was surprised that apparently a maniac had appeared. Yuta read that the victims were an English ICM teacher and a grandfather who sold flowers by the station. An unknown person attacked them with a knife yesterday. The identity of the culprit could not be ascertained. The lives of both of them were not threatened, but the motive of the crime was unclear. He didn't care about gender and age either, and it looked like the maniac was just having fun. Poro was horrified and said it was quite cruel. Poro was saddened that he wouldn't be able to meet these people again. Not in the teacher's lounge when he had questions, nor in the morning on his way to school. The saddest part was when the people close to them were injured. Kimura was furious and said he wouldn't forgive a maniac for mutilating women and old people. Kimura was ready to step on the perpetrator right away and give him a good telling off. But it seemed that Kimura was not only going to reprimand him, but also finish him off. In that case, Kimura thought they would do it with their own hands. But Poro seemed like they should refrain from corporal punishment. Yuta was against it, as well as apparently Poro. Yuta didn't have the slightest desire to get into silly arguments. Kimura looked at Yuta sternly, not understanding how such a debauchee could call a teacher by name, and threatened to make a real omelet out of his bellowing face. Yuta accepted his challenge and offered to try to do it, but he was pretty sure there was 100 times out of 100 chance he'd knock him out. Kimura decided that today they would definitely find out who was the strongest in this universe. Poro didn't remember them being sworn enemies of each other, but Ryuugaku was excited and told them to get started. She asked to finish each other off, and she was also curious how long they would last against each other. Nana gave 9 out of 10 that Kimura would win, and Ryuugaku asked the girls not to go overboard. Kimura raised his fist and turned to his goddess Ryuugaku and asked her to look at this. Ryuugaku asked him to stop. Besides, she didn't understand why he was calling her his goddess. But Kimura thought that his teacher's fiancée should definitely be a goddess, and Ryuugaku blushed with embarrassment. Nana grinned and reminded him that Poro was supposed to die soon, but Ryuugaku didn't realize what she was carrying as usual. Kimura said that since he had already seen the teacher's face, it was okay to leave. Poro was shocked that Kimura had come to school just to look at him and left. Rumors began to spread around the school that Kirigami was friends with the demon. It's been a month since the hero moved into the human world. At first he was worried about how it would go, but now his days were full of encounters and discoveries, and Poro prayed that the remaining time would pass just as smoothly. But barely had he had time to think about it when their whole class heard a loud scream. The students went outside and saw an ambulance. Apparently it was a new victim of the maniac with the same signs. No one would have thought it could have happened in broad daylight, and it was said that there were no witnesses at the time of the attack. Poro noticed that the victim was Mrs. Miyazawa from the library. She was the third victim, also right in front of the school. Poro noticed the same pentagram on her hand, but this time the number was 19. It must have been some kind of message, and Poro looked at the pictures of the victims. He peeked at a picture on the phone of the guy standing next to him. Poro was surprised he had pictures of the victims. The guy with the eye patch looked at Poro and remembered that he was from 5th grade. The hero didn't realize how he knew him. The guy enthusiastically grabbed the hero's hands and exclaimed that they had met at the most opportune time. The stranger introduced himself as Hikaru Tsukumo, that he was the vice chairman of the journalism club. Honestly, he wanted to ask the heroes something, but not here, and suggested that they go and chat in the club room. The surprised heroes followed the Hikaru to the journalism club. As a journalist, he sensed something amiss and immediately started tracking these cases. He provided the guys with pictures of the victims where the pentagram was clearly visible. Hikaru thought it would become clearer if one looked closely, but as could be seen, all the victims had a pentagram symbol and a number carved on the back of their palm. It's possible that the unsub wrote the victims' numbers in order, and if that was the case, the numbers would be increasing. Hikaru didn't think there were any other victims that couldn't be found, and it was strange that they were going in descending order at all. Hikaru wanted to understand at least the meaning of that star. He clutched the phone in his hands and said that he would never forgive such despicable crimes. In the name of journalism, he was going to bring the criminal to light, and then, using such a sensation, he would become the head of the club. And for the sake of that, he would also definitely try to solve this case. Hikaru bowed to the Poro and asked for his help in this case. It might have seemed to the hero, and yet his other half of his motives sounded rather trivial. Of course, the hero would spare no effort to help solve such crimes, but he didn't understand why Hikaru had asked him specifically. But Hikaru smiled and said it was pretty obvious. After all, Poro was the strongest villain with guys like Imp and Debaucher Yuta at his command. And with him, he would definitely be able to exhale peacefully, even when it came to particularly brutal crimes. Poro was embarrassed that Hikaru had such a strange image of him. He couldn't say that he was a villain or that he was the strongest, but Yuta thought it was cool, because Poro was becoming quite the celebrity. Hikaru apologized that the brutal image might have put him off balance and noted that the Poro was quite humble. It was also written about in an article about a demon that had descended to Earth in this month's special issue of the school magazine. Poro exclaimed that their headline spoiled everything. Hikaru perked up and suggested the boys move on to their investigation. Suddenly, Poro's phone vibrated and the hero brought it to his ear. The hero was shocked when he heard that he was receiving a call from the hospital between heaven and earth. He was told that the number of the Kirigami-sama was written down in his school notebook. And as it turned out, that was the hospital where all the other victims were lying. It was said that so far none of them had ever woken up. When Kimuradono was found, he was covered in blood and the number 15 was carved on the back of his palm. All the boys were shocked when they heard this. Yuta didn't understand how Kimuradono managed to lose. The guys came to visit the guy that was unconscious. Hikaru noticed that the number had decreased again. Ruika ordered the Kimura to come to his senses, for she had brought him some food. Poro took his friend's hand where the pentagram was and felt faint traces of magic. The star-shaped symbol was also known as a pentagram. In the demon world, such patterns were often used for kamens and witches' circles. It was also carved on prey, and it was then used to help determine whose it was. Poro still didn't understand the meaning of the numbers, but he assumed it was the work of some demon. But if they wanted Poro, it was unclear why they would attack humans. Suddenly, the hero remembered something and wondered where to do Nanno. Meanwhile, Nanna looked into a dark alleyway where she spotted a scary clawed creature and smirked. It made a terrifying screeching noise against the walls of the buildings. She finally waited for it and said it was rude to keep the lady waiting. She asked not to think that she would be his next victim and spread her wings, saying that it wouldn't work that way. The girl unleashed her power and said it was time to destroy his diabolical plan. Poro ran to find Nanna, but Hikaru thought she might have just left. Yuta didn't understand why Poro was so spry. Poro speculated that she might have been in danger in case her divine power abandoned her. The hero had a bad feeling and it was confirmed. After running a few blocks, the hero came across Nanna lying unconscious on the floor. On her hand was scratched a pentagram with the number 12. Poro asked her to wake up and Yuta asked Hikaru to call an ambulance faster. There was simply no way that the second most powerful angel after a god could be defeated. This was not something a normal demon was capable of. Poro was terrified, not realizing what kind of creature was behind all of this. Poro noticed the writing at the Nanna's hand. Apparently she had managed to leave him a message. The message referred to a diary, but Poro didn't understand why this was happening at such a time. After a while it became clear to the hero. He thanked Nanna for her help, then took out his diary and opened it. While Poro was actively searching for something in her journal, Hikaru scrutinized her number and decided that they were being bullied. Poro flipped through his diary to page 12 and realized what the secret was. The thing is, the numbers carved into the victim's hands were written in his diary. They corresponded to the numbers of the pages on which his encounters with the victims were written. The perpetrator leafed through his diary in reverse order and attacked the people mentioned on each of the pages. But the hero didn't realize what he was doing all this for. Poro went back to the pages from a little earlier. He wanted to find the name of the person who was before the Nanna. Poro froze in horror as he read his notes. Earlier, before Nanna, he had a date with a Ryuugaku. Meanwhile, Ryuugaku was guarding the Kimura by his bed. She was rather bored by the fact that no one was around. She thought that Nanna was pretty strong, and the Poro was only worried about her for nothing. Ryuugaku didn't notice someone's twisted ugly black hand that was already approaching her from the window. Before Ryuugaku knew it, behind her, a huge, fearsome creature had shattered the window and crept inside. She immediately realized that it was the same creature that had attacked the Kimura and Nanna. Ryuugaku stopped the creature with her hand and motioned for them to move to another location to let the wounded sleep. She then used her fiery palm and pushed the fearsome creature away from her. The monster flew outside and Ryuugaku instantly caught up with him using her demonic power. She told him that demons like him she had never met before and used a descending flame on the creature. The girl sealed the monster into the ground and thought that if she used fire here, she could do minimal damage. But she knew that this creature would definitely not die from that. She learned that it would appear here from the Bloody Angel. Nano had previously told Ryuugaku that this monster would attack in the order that was recorded in the Poro diary. Ryuugaku didn't understand how she knew that, but Nano grinned and said she knew Poro herself down to the very tips of her fingernails. She had just memorized the entire diary, so it was easy to guess. Ryuugaku found it rather creepy and disgusting. Nanna didn't understand how Ryuugaku could not know about it and yet call herself his fiancée. Ryuugaku suddenly wondered if a Cerberus could eat a roasted stalker, and Nanna grinned. As she said, one had to consider the fact that the perpetrator was attacking those who had something to do with the Poro of the Sama. And as Nanna thought, the perpetrator's target was the Poro himself. Nanna asked Ryuugaku to keep it a secret, for telling everything now would bring nothing but suffering to the Poro Sama. Nanna probably did not know who the culprit was, but the fact that he was coming towards her seemed to her a real stroke of luck. For revenge, she was willing to go to any lengths to find out who was really behind this. She said she would check on the victims and ask them to send her best wishes. Ryuugaku asked her to wait for a while and wanted to ask her something. She didn't understand why she had decided to tell her, because Nanna hated her. Nanna didn't deny that she did. She hated with all her soul her vulgar, mean and pathetic person who could even lick a cake wrapper. Ryuugaku blushed, not realizing how Nanna knew that. Still, they were both united by their love for the Poro Sama, and since that was the case, Nanna was willing to entrust the secret to her soulmate. Ryuugaku thought the creature looked rather pathetic from the looks of it, but it was actually quite difficult to fight it. But this monster's magic was clearly lacking. Although it looked like a demon, but its strength was at most 100th rank. While Ryuugaku was fighting this creature, she couldn't understand how Nanna could lose to it. Meanwhile, Poro and the others returned to the chamber and realized they were too late. It was good that no one was hurt, and everyone wondered where that huge hole in the wall had come from. Yuta and Hikaru assumed that the monster had attacked Ryuugaku as it planned. It became clear to Hikaru that this thing could destroy walls. While they were discussing this, something caught the attention of the Poro. He sensed the Ryuugaku's magic, even though it was somewhere far away. Poro assumed that it had moved to another place so that Kimura would not be harmed. The hero traveled lightning fast through the corridor filled with people and decided that he didn't have time to think and needed to act. Yuta only had time to look around, but the Poro was nowhere to be found. The guys realized that the hero had left them alone again. Ryuugaku was still confronting the strange creature and did not understand why everything was happening. She was exhausted and didn't understand why this monster still wasn't falling. Ryuugaku had spent quite a lot of magic on it, and in such a situation, a normal demon would have definitely burned to the ground. But on this creature, it was as if it had no effect. In response, the monster let loose a bunch of vines on the girl and wrapped its arms around her body. Ryuugaku realized that it had caught her after all. She was sure that if she put in her best effort, then he should have been blown to pieces. But suddenly Ryuugaku's whole body felt like it was extinguished, and she felt that there was no more magic and flame in her. The creature approached the girl and pierced her body through with a spearhead. Ryuugaku remembered MANHWA's wishes, asking her to give the spawn her best wishes, and she was not about to give up. Ryuugaku grabbed the monster's head and told it that her revenge was more than just a trifle, and she would repay him for the angel in a way that would tear him to shreds. Ryuugaku gathered the rest of her strength and unleashed the power of the destructive light. Her hand was covered in blinding light, followed by an explosion. The creature fell to the ground, and its severed spike that pierced Ryuugaku remained in her. The girl rid herself of the spike with hatred and shouted at the wounded creature. Ryuugaku was also embarrassed by the fact that she wanted to eat badly, and it was all in front of some critter. It used some strange technique after which all its magic seemed to run out. Ryuugaku assumed he had done the same thing to MANHWA. But Ryuugaku raised her head proudly and thought that this victory was hers. No sooner was she happy for herself than she felt the presence of the creature right behind her and froze in place. She didn't understand how it could move after she ripped its head off. Ryuugaku only had time to see the sharp guess that flew straight at her. At the same moment, the cry of the Poro was heard, ordering the monster to get its paws off his bride. Before the girl could blink, the Poro stood in front of her and unleashed his demonic power to repel the monster's blow. The guy turned to Ryuugaku and apologized to her for arriving so late and wanted to make sure she was okay. Ryuugaku thought she was dying and smiled with happiness, but Poro asked her to pull herself together. Barely had the hero been distracted by Ryuugaku when suddenly they noticed incomprehensible writing circling around them. Poro realized that all those strange objects had come out of the body of that mangled creature. Ryuugaku noticed a certain object between the writings that alerted her. Barely had it fallen to the ground when Ryuugaku sprang to her feet and grabbed it, preventing the object from falling. After examining the small ball-shaped object, the Ryuugaku realized what it was. Poro noticed that it was the eyeball of the same creature, but Ryuugaku said it was a divine eye, a tool used by exorcists. Exorcists weren't as powerful as the Poros, so it didn't seem surprising to Ryuugaku that he hadn't heard of them. There were also those among humans who were equal in strength to demons. These same exorcists could not use magic directly, but they could control it with playing cards, needles, and other objects, and thus they were able to do what she and the MANHWA were able to do. It was quite possible that this demon was merely a puppet of the criminal himself, which surprised the Poro. In other words, this criminal was human. It was said that about 100 years ago, some demons had tried fighting exorcists. Ryuugaku had an acquaintance from whom she learned about this eye, and this eye had a pair. By implanting the eye in the demon they were fighting, the criminal was undoubtedly watching them the whole time. And if the perpetrator wore that eye himself, then somehow he must have concealed it somehow. Poro thought about Ryuugaku's words and it hit him. Looking at the creature's eye, he exclaimed that this simply could not be. At this time, the criminal realized that the boys had finally figured it out. The heroes had not noticed it for so long that he began to worry. Hikaru was glad that everything had gone according to plan, because he would have been too bored if everything had gone smoothly. With these thoughts, he carved a pentagram on the arm of the Yuta that was tied up and trying to call for help. If everything went according to his plan, Hikaru wouldn't be able to have any fun properly. The madman drew a pentagram, after which he carved a number on Yuta's hand. Poro realized that Yuta was in danger and needed to get back to him right away. Ryuugaku was going to go with him, but the hero refused, saying she had fought enough already. He didn't want to put her in danger fighting an enemy whose strength exceeded even that of the demons. He wished for Ryuugaku to rest here and check for the smell of her eyes. This odor was unlike any other, but one couldn't help but notice how great its power was. It wasn't hard to guess who it was coming from. Poro clearly understood that the smell was coming from him to Hikaru. Poro found their location, then sprinted toward them at full speed, leaving the Ryuugaku behind. After a couple of moments, Poro found himself in front of the Hikaru that was holding the bound Yuta hostage and was surprised by the hero's quick appearance. Hikaru realized that he had been brought here by the spirit of exorcism. That was what one would expect from such a powerful demon like the Threshold. The hero was not going to listen to him and approached Hikaru, intending to give him a swift blow. But the Poro was surprised when Hikaru stopped him with an invisible barrier. Hikaru smiled and admitted that it was rather cruel, since he hadn't even finished his sentence yet. Hikaru thought he didn't have to worry though, since there was no way the demons could break through his defenses anyway. The guy put his hand on Yuta's head and invited the Poro to listen to him. After all, Poro probably wouldn't want everyone to die without knowing the reason why. Poro stopped where he was, asking the Hikaru what he wanted. Hikaru replied that he didn't have any particular purpose, besides he was just a simple exorcist. He had no doubt that his fiery girlfriend Ryuugaku had already told him everything. The mission of exorcists was to protect people and hunt monstrous demons. More specifically, it was technically that. But Hikaru just liked it and loved killing demons and hurting them and all that kind of stuff. He decided that life was much better without them, and it was a great hobby. Plus, the whole thing was profitable for him. He was surprised at first. Hikaru never thought that the day would come when he would be able to kill the strongest demon. But just killing it and ending it all would be too boring. Poro looked quite happy, trying his best to pretend to be a friend. So Hikaru decided to start by hurting his friends. Killing someone who was messing around with a demon wasn't that much of a problem. Hikaru was sure that it was a great plan. Frankly speaking, the Poro let him, a suspicious type, get close to him. And so Hikaru was able to watch as Poro gradually realized that the criminal's target was people close to him. It seemed amazing to Hikaru that he could observe all this up close, but the Poro did not understand him at all. The amazed Hikaru broke out into a smile, and admitted that he really liked it when Poro made that face. To him, it was just beautiful. It was the face of someone who didn't realize the unusual circumstances he was in. Hikaru wanted to see it again. He wanted to see the face that was full of misery and grabbed the Yudu by the scruff of the neck. Hikaru wanted to see the hero's face after he killed his friend Yudu in front of him and put the knife blade to his neck. Poro went into a rage and used his powerful punch, but the Hikaru barrier only slightly shattered and the barrier shards flew straight into Poro's hand. Hikaru had warned him earlier that demons couldn't penetrate his defense and smiled. The large shards pinned the Poro to the ground, embedding themselves in his entire body down to his head. It was almost impossible to fight demons without using magic, so people invented something against them. These were self-defense tools, amulets that weakened the demon's powers, various killing tools and spells to control demons and other humans. And all of these were an outgrowth of the hatred and resentment people had accumulated over several millennia. That was probably why demons were struck by this power. Hikaru grabbed the immobilized Poro by the hair and lifted his head. He said that it was the power of the people called exorcists that he used just for fun. Hikaru smirked and suggested that he should remember the faces of all the people he wrote about in his diary. After all, this would be his last memory. Suddenly, there was a sort of scrambling sound and Hikaru noticed a bright flash of light in front of him. It was a Ryuugaku that went after the Poro and used pillars of flame. Hikaru defended himself with his power and didn't understand why she interrupted him at such a good moment. Ryuugaku was furious that some exorcist was doing this to her husband. Poro shouted at Ryuugaku and told her to run away, because whatever they were doing he was too strong for them. Hikaru didn't understand why she did that and reminded her that any fire could be put out with water. The guy apologized and told Ryuugaku that he wasn't interested in her and asked her to just die. With these words, he fired a spear of light at the girl, which pierced the Ryuugaku's body through and through. The beam hit the heart area. Ryuugaku felt a sharp wave of pain, after which she fell to the ground unconscious. Hikaru smiled, thinking that it was about level 10 magic. It was quite easy for him to punch as many as 8 holes into the heart of someone so defenseless. Poro froze in place, keeping his eyes on Ryuugaku's immobilized body. Hikaru then placed the amulet on the Yuta and said that he would be rather uncomfortable if the Yuta started acting violent while he was carrying it. So Hikaru decided to put him to sleep for a while and Yuta fell to the ground. The boy smiled, for it seemed to him that it was only going to get more fun now. He watched the Poro who was still shaken by the possible death of the Ryuugaku. The hero didn't even notice how he fell asleep, and Hikaru was glad that he finally came to his senses. When he used the labels on someone, he had to wait for the victim to regain consciousness on his own. Poro noticed that Hikaru had placed him in the very center of the pentagram. Poro noticed the hospital, which was exactly the same as the one they had already been to. Hikaru had drawn a circle here beforehand, and Poro felt his hand was hot. The hero didn't even notice as Hikaru cut his hand and drew a pentagram with a crossed out 0 on it. Hikaru said that his pentagram was number 0. The other pentagrams simply took blood as a sacrifice, but his pentagram awakened magic. Actually, the other numbers weren't that necessary for the Hikaru, but the point was to have them match the page numbers. One victim was enough, but considering how powerful Poro was, still Hikaru decided he needed a few more people. Poro didn't realize what he was saying, whereupon he heard a crunching sound in his ears. The hero didn't understand why he was overflowing with energy. For some reason, demonic wings and horns with spikes grew out of him. Hikaru reminded the hero that he had previously awakened, but his awakening was incomplete. But with the help of this ritual, his power was about to manifest for real. If the awakening was complete, the spawn would also have the abilities of a demon king, and he would be able to destroy this city, or rather the entire world. Hikaru knew that the Poro would completely lose itself and wouldn't be able to stop all of this. Poro would end up destroying with his own hands the human world he loved so much. He would be unable to bear the weight of this sin, and would end up begging for Hikaru to kill him. Hikaru composed this scenario impromptu, and thought it was simply beautiful. At the moment when the Poro was losing his consciousness and turning into a monster, Yuta woke up and noticed his friend in front of him. At this point, the Poro looked completely different and could no longer contain himself. Poro asked the Hikaru to stop it, for he could no longer contain his powers. The guy stepped on the hero's head and didn't understand what he was talking about. After all, the awakened demons destroy everything in their path, warp space and time. And now the Poro was already posing a danger to humans. Hikaru believed that such cruel and bloodthirsty creatures like Poro had nothing to learn from humans, and just being in this world alone only hindered everyone. The boy told the Poro that his pathetic diary-keeping game was over. He had done a great job wasting his strength. Eventually, the Poro went completely insane. He began to look like a full-fledged demon. His right hand turned into terrifying claws, and his body was covered with demonic black power. Just as Hikaru thought, the Poro was ready to destroy the entire world he loved so much. The guy with a smirk decided that he would watch it from a safe place. Then he used his amulets and they glowed. But what Hikaru completely didn't expect was that the Poro decided to turn his powers against him. He easily destroyed the amulets that Hikaru didn't even have time to activate. Poro instantly sealed the guy into the roof of the building and Hikaru smirked, saying that it was his strongest amulet. He was sorry he wouldn't get to see the hero's last moments of life and lastly asked him to suffer properly. Yuta shouted to the Poro and asked him to stop, but apparently the Poro could no longer hear him. Suddenly the demon was jumped on by a Kimura, who asked his teacher to come to his senses. He reminded Poro what he had taught him before. Poro had taught the Kimura that the whole point was not strength. Yuta was surprised that Kimura had already had time to come to his senses. But the sacrifice needed for the ritual had already been taken, so the Kimura came out of his coma. And in addition, all of his other friends had also regained consciousness. Ruika used a rope of fire on the Poro, and Nan-na tried to stop him with chains of insatiability. Ruika exclaimed that she wasn't falling in love with a monster who only cared about his power, and ordered the Poro to come to his senses now. Nan-na smiled and said that only she could kill the Poro. Nan-na couldn't let anyone else do it. Nan-na was surprised that the fire demon was alright, considering the terrible wounds she had received earlier. The girls started arguing again, and Ruika reminded Nan-na that she had healed her while she lay like a log. Nan-na asked her to back off and said she was just sleeping. But either way, if the Poro lost his temper, it would be the end of the world for them all. They had to figure out a way to stop him. Before she could finish speaking, the Poro released another charge of its energy and there was a deafening and violent explosion. Everyone in the vicinity fell to the ground. Hikaru took one last look at the bodies around and smirked, saying that the people were pretty pathetic. The hero was about to stab the Hikaru with his ugly hand when he was suddenly stopped by Yuta. The guy held out his diary to the Poro. He smiled at his friend and told the Poro that they would stop here. Yuta knew that Poro was diligent in keeping the diary and knew that he was actually a good guy. That's why everyone was trying so hard to help him. Yuta thought it was wonderful that Poro existed in this world. Hikaru smirked and told Yuta that all his efforts were useless. After all, no matter what he said, the Poro would not stop. Yuta tried to remind his friend for what purpose he had come to their world and wanted the Poro to take back his journal. Tears came to the mad demon's eyes and he unconsciously reached for his journal. Yuta smiled and motioned for his friend to go home. Yuta was glad that Poro had finally returned to them, and was glad that he was able to help him. Poro began to come to his senses and said Yuta's name to Dono. At this point, Hikaru managed to get up and put a knife to Yuta's throat. He told Poro that if he unleashed all his power, he would destroy everything in the world. Hikaru thought that the most interesting thing was that a circle drawn once could be used for a ritual an unlimited number of times. Humans also possessed magic, albeit in negligible amounts, and if one performed a ritual that made him suffer many times, using more and more magic, one day the Poro would no longer be able to endure it. Hikaru really would have liked to have some more fun, but there was nothing to do. Poro didn't let him finish and hit Hikaru with his crowning Poro punch. He said he would wipe out all his moves, techniques, and his magic. Hikaru gave a final laugh, not believing such a thing. He fell to the ground and said it was pretty stupid. But the Poro didn't care what he said. He warned the Hikaru not to dare lay a finger on those he cared about. But then he supplemented his sentence by saying that there would be no next time. After the Poro dealt with the enemy, he cried like a child and apologized for daring to raise his hand on the Yudu Dono. He thought it was all his fault, but the Yuta asked him not to worry about it. Thus the series of crimes came to an end. Since then, Hikaru was never seen again. It was as if the school hadn't heard from him either. Poro thought they would never meet again. All the victims had fully recovered and the usual joyful days at school were back. At least it seemed that way to the hero. His friends didn't give him a pass. Kimura admired his teacher and said it was pretty cool, and he even had horns. Yuta was also impressed. Ruika dreamed of having a similar Poro hugging her. Nana wished she could kill him while he was in that form. Yuta Hitoishi was also known by the nickname of the Dabachi. He was the strongest villain of the human world. Keikairo Kimura was given the nickname Demon. He along with Yuta shared the title of the strongest villain of the human world. They both had a slightly explosive temper, but a kind soul, and were both friends of the protagonist. But Poro had absolutely no idea what was happening to them today. Poro was puzzled as to why the two looked so strange studying the pile of books in front of them. Yuta had a bandage tied on his forehead with an inscription on it, Undisputed Victory. Yuta was studying the book as best he could and drinking some sort of liquid bottle, trying his best to stay awake. Kimura, meanwhile, was desperately trying to make out through his glasses what was written in his book. He was cursing because nothing was clear. They looked even scarier than usual now. Poro hoped they weren't angry. The hero was surprised, and perhaps it might sound rather cruel of him, but it looked like the two of them were reading books. Yuta Dona was smart, but he had trouble with reading. He would fall asleep already after the first page. Even now, after every page, he was consuming coffee and energy drinks. Kimura Dona was honestly dumb, so his brain was overheating from the mere sight of letters. You could see that he was trying his best right now, but he was reading the book upside down and could hardly understand what it was saying. But Poro did not understand what moved them. At that moment, a girl entered the office and wished good morning to Hitoshi and Kimura Kunu. She brought them her favorite books. She couldn't take more unfortunately due to the heaviness, but she could guarantee that they were interesting. The girl smiled sweetly and asked them to read them. The guys seemed to come alive and greeted Fujiwara-senpai, but Poro had absolutely no idea who it was. Fujiwara asked her to tell her if they liked the books, in which case she would bring them more. Kimura readily agreed with her. The girl laughed and apologized for only talking about herself. She just never had friends who liked books before, and that made her happy. She said that she would wait for their impressions, after which she said goodbye to the guys and left. Kimura and Yuta were apparently crazy about her and saw Fujiwara off with satisfied faces. Poro couldn't believe they could fall in love and the guys asked him to be quiet. It was Fumika Fujiwara from the 3rd grade class of group, as she was a bookworm that worked in the library. And from the first moment they met her in the hallway yesterday, Kimura immediately fell in love. Yuta looked just like his friend and said it was fate. Poro didn't quite understand what they were talking about. Yuta said that yesterday on TV from the zodiac signs predicted a love encounter, but Poro thought they were just making things more complicated. Anyway, they offered her friendship. The guys told her they love books and that they read them 100 pages a day. Kimura decided to embellish and said they read 1,000 a day. The girl got excited and told them that was fine. Poro didn't understand why they didn't just admit it to her. Yuta got into an altercation with Kimura. He was proving to him that he wasn't lying when he told her he loved books and that's why he would date senpai. Kimura disagreed with him and said it would be him. Poro became uncomfortable. He realized that neither of them would give in to the other. Suddenly, one of them fell to the floor unconscious, which alarmed Poro. That's what it meant, that love could drive one mad. Fuji thought it was great to stop by the bookstore with her friends. It was fun alone too, but after all, it was a way to choose and socialize at the same time. Her heart fluttered, but the guys could no longer see the books. They accompanied the girl from their last strength, and Poro seemed not fluttering here, but exhaustion. Earlier, Kimura and Yuta had told Poro that they would go with her to the store, but they knew nothing about it and asked him to tell them a little about the books. But Poro didn't understand how he, who had only learned a little about their world, could help them. Behind the guys, a couple of guys showed up, who didn't expect to meet the troublemaker Yudu and the demon. They didn't think those two could read books. They also spotted a girl with them who looked pretty cute. Meanwhile, Fuji remembered that Yuta liked Russian literature and showed him the book, asking his opinion of it. At this point, Yuta felt embarrassed and realized that he had overdone it a bit earlier. Poro also noticed something on the bookshelves that struck him. It was a book about War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy, a masterpiece, one of the top 20 novels in the world. It was a historical novel describing 19th century Russia, and it had over 500 characters. It is very famous, so much so that Yuta had to read it too. But with his whole appearance, Yuta showed that he hadn't. He obviously didn't know anything about this book. Yuta tried to dodge and told Fuji that it was quite interesting. He thought that wars and such should not have been allowed. Fuji perked up and exclaimed that that was the point. Poro was shocked that the power of words alone could be enough. The girl also found a book for Kimura as well. He had said earlier that it was his most favorite Dazai book. She wanted to know which episode he liked the most, and Kimura covered himself in cold sweat with excitement. It seemed to him that she might know Milo's Dazai well and hesitated to answer. The Book of Milos was one of Osamu Dazai's most outstanding works. It was based on the myths of ancient Greece, a famous work placed even in native language textbooks. Kimura replied that this book was definitely his favorite. He adored the moment when the nameless cat becomes enraged and goes to fight the demons of the island. Poro realized that he had only guessed the moment where he became enraged, the rest was just nonsense. The girl grinned and admitted that it was quite unusual and funny. Besides, she didn't remember such a moment. Poro seemed like she herself didn't realize what she was asking. Suddenly the guys felt sick again and passed out right at Fuji and Poro's feet. Poro took his friends by the scruff of the neck and pulled them behind him. He told the surprised Fuji to go to the bathroom with them and asked them to wait for him. Poro knew that this place filled with books was clearly not for them. While Fuji was waiting for the heroes, two male figures of the guys who had been watching them earlier appeared behind her. Poro tried to bring his friends to their senses and asked them to end this. After all, if this keeps up, these books will just kill them. But Kimura told Poro that a man who gave up at this point would simply fall. Poro replied that they had already fallen when they lied to that girl. Yuta became animated again and said that he would not lose because he still had some stamina left. Poro was afraid that he would only get worse if he won. Kimura wasn't going to give up and said the senpai would be his, because he had already done too much. Yuta asked him to shut up, not realizing what he could do. Poro had absolutely no idea what to do with them. When they came out of the restroom, they heard Fuji asking not to be touched. But the guys surrounding her only wanted to warn her. They said that her friends were debauchees and demons, and they obviously would not read books. It was clear to them that they had her fooled. Yuta and Kimura were shocked that these guys had told her everything, but Fuji didn't care. The guys who picked on her didn't understand her answer at all. The girl said that it could have been true, but even if it was, the fact that they wanted to like the books wasn't a lie, and she was happy even with that. Her answer surprised everyone, including Kimura and Yuta. The dark-haired guy took her hand and said she was pretty cute, except that with her books she had completely forgotten about people. He offered to go with him to show her some fun activities more fun than her books, but Fuji asked him to let her go. At the same moment, Kimura and Yuta intervened and hit the guys who were harassing Fuji. From the force of the blow, both guys flew backwards and fell to the floor. Fuji thanked the guys for their help and Yuta and Kimura apologized to her. After all, what those guys said was true and they had never read a book. But Fuji saw nothing wrong with that and smiled. She thought it was a good thing that they would love them now. Yuta and Kimura were touched by her answer and they were ready to cry in front of senpai. But she had a condition that she would not listen to any more of their essays on books like War and Peace and other books. Meanwhile, the attackers decided to hide behind nearby shelves and threw down a bookcase of books on the girl. Poro got to her aid in time and managed to not only hold the Fuji and the bookshelf, but also distributed all the books into stacks. He praised the boys for being honest about everything, and that made everything better. Yuta and Kimura were thrilled with their teacher. Fuji was so amazed that she didn't take her eyes off the Poro. She blushed and covered her mouth with her hands as Poro smiled at her and told senpai that he was glad she wasn't hurt. Kimura and Yuta couldn't figure out what was wrong, and immediately noticed that something was wrong. It was clearly seen that in this fight, Poro had won them over with his kindness. The hero helped the girl up and put the bookcase back in place. While Poro was at Yuta's house, he familiarized himself with the computer. But at some point his screen lit up and showed that there was a virus on his device. Poro didn't understand how this could have happened since he was just surfing the internet. He didn't know what to do in such a case, so he assumed that he should have pressed the button in front of him. The computer suggested pressing the button for the virus destroyer to get rid of the virus. The hero was shocked when a sign popped up in front of him thanking him for purchasing the virus destroyer for 1 billion yen. He was asked to transfer the money to a certain bank card and Poro was confused. Poro didn't understand what this meant. After all, he had just pressed a button to delete the virus and now he was being charged 1 billion. Poro thought that it must be a mistake and that he had to cancel the purchase immediately. In case of canceling the purchase, the system offered to call the hero at a certain number, which Poro did. On the phone, the operator said that he called the information office of the company Vidi and asked to introduce himself and the purpose of the call. The hero was a little confused but gave his name, and then said that he accidentally pressed the wrong button and accidentally bought something. and he would like to cancel this purchase. The operator said that his order was successfully cancelled, after which the guy breathed a sigh of relief. But suddenly he got another shiver when the man said that he had to pay 5 billion yen to cancel the purchase. Poro admitted that he didn't have such a huge amount, but if he didn't pay, he would be held liable for breach of contract. Poro asked the people to settle this peacefully, as he didn't even know he was buying something. The operator approached Mr. Kirakami. He abruptly changed his tone and said that if he didn't pay them, he would kill him. The guy on the other side of the phone threatened that they knew his name and phone number and would personally come to him and make him pay. The operator said they wouldn't hurt him if he paid them himself. Besides, thanks to the virus, they could find out how much money was in his account. Poro thought that was true and a thought popped into his head. The scammers didn't realize what had just happened and assumed that the hero had done something wrong again. The guy was surprised that Poro hung up the phone. But at that very moment the wall of their building was pierced by something powerful, and the crooks fell to the floor. One of the guys got to his feet, not realizing where his partner had gone. He assumed that the police had attacked them, but his surprise was even greater when he saw the young guy in front of him. Once inside, the hero said that they fell down so quickly because he was a little overexcited. Poro realized that now he would have to pay for the damage, but he had bought too many games yesterday, and now, unfortunately, he had almost no money left. Poro tearfully opened his half-empty wallet and said that he wouldn't be able to pay them during this day, but he would be sure to have everything ready later. He held out his wallet to the crooks and asked them to take what he had left. One of the guys thought that he had never met such intimidating types before and only agreed with him. But the Poro again apologized and said he had tricked them. He had already realized that their group was fraudulent. The operator who had threatened him earlier knelt down and bowed. He apologized and promised that he would never do it again. Taro Gomi was just an errand boy who answered the phone. No one had ever told him that it was possible to meet such a monster. Taro thought it was an easy job, but in that case, all he could do was apologize and leave as soon as possible. Taro felt that unless he thought of something right now, there was no going back. He told the Vice that he didn't really intend to do that. He just came to Tokyo with a dream of becoming a guitarist, and his senpai forced him against his will to help him in this endeavor, and it all went downhill from there. They knew all about him, so Taro couldn't run away from them. Taro didn't argue that the Poro was pretty strong, but he thought he was a long way from the demon-like ringleaders, and the Poro had to pay them or they would finish him off. Taro asked for forgiveness, but the Poro was just unlucky, so he had to accept it and pay. Taro was just shocked when he saw the crying Poro. Poro felt sorry for the guy and called him a real poor guy. Taro pretended to cry and thanked Poro for understanding. He also thanked the hero for supposedly being able to pour out his soul to him. Poro smiled and said that even if humans were like demons, they were still humans, and would surely understand if you told them everything from the bottom of your heart. Poro wished he could work with him to bring about this understanding, but Taro understood nothing at all. He didn't understand what Poro meant by saying that they would try to understand each other. At that moment, the doors behind the robe opened abruptly. The gang of men that went inside told Taro that he was a real wimp and promised to deal with him a little later. At the head of the gang was the head of the phone scammers, who had a kitten of his favorite breed of munchkin under his jacket. All he saw in front of him was their piece of rag named Taro and a guy they didn't know. Takater, the head of the crooks, seemed completely out of place, and Taro confusedly shifted his gaze to the Poro, who was no longer there. Taro tried to explain everything to Mr. Takater, but as soon as he noticed that the hero was not there, he was immediately confused. Poro somehow ended up right next to the head of the crooks and apologized for invading their office. He petted his kitten and assumed he was in charge. Taro was at a loss for words, not realizing what Poro was doing. He couldn't believe that he could be forgiven for not making him pay, though it seemed to Taro that this guy's mind was only thinking about all sorts of peace-loving nonsense. Poro looked at Takeru with a smile and said that he had one small request for him. The head immediately ordered to finish off the hero. He swung his hand and hit Poro in the head, but the hero answered him with the same blow. Takatora fell to the ground, and a frightened cat crawled out from under his jacket. Poro hoped he was alright and asked the head about it. All the rogues around couldn't believe their eyes that some guy was able to deal with Takatora so easily. His sidekicks immediately decided to leave the Poro alone and make a quick getaway. They wanted to contact Bodo-san, which made Taro terrified. He went crazy and put his hand on the Poro's shoulder and said that they were finished. If they didn't run away now, they would be killed. Poro didn't know what he was talking about, because they hadn't reached an understanding with this man yet. Taro thought that the hero was crazy and said that it was not about Tactor. Now his friends have gone to the head of the phone scam corporation, Ukama, and the boss of Bodo is sure to be angry with them. He certainly won't let them die a quick death if he catches them. Poro suddenly had a wonderful thought. He banged his fist on his hand and said that they could appeal to the Bodo Dono. These words completely confused Taro. Meanwhile, Bodo found out from the boys that they were having trouble with phone scams. They told him that Gomi had brought the Kohai with him and that he had done away with Mr. Takaru. Bodo thought the guy was pretty cute and asked how old he was. The crooks assumed he was over 10 years old and Bodo said that was excellent. He asked to be sure to catch them, after which they would put on a dismemberment show with them. Gantetsu Bodo finished his last fingernail with nail polish and examined his hand quite a bit. The head with the painted lips, scar over his left eye and fingernails smiled and said that there was nothing like the screams of little boys. No sooner had he thought this than he was startled by the loud rumble of the wall that shattered to pieces in front of him. Poro looked at the boss with a smile and assumed that he was the Bodo Dono. He paid no attention to the guys who were trying their best to hold the guy down by all sorts of places. Bodo was impressed by his arrival, and besides, his doors were of impenetrable material. He thought the Poro was a wonderful boy and asked him what he was interested in. Bodo assumed that he had come here to kill him and grinned, but the Poro replied that he had only come here to talk to them. Taro fell to the ground and thought that he was only a lowly man. The young rogue didn't understand why Poro had dragged him into all this. Poro wanted to talk to Bodo about the fraud over the phone, but he wanted to ask for something else first. Taro was shocked when Poro asked him to let him go, because he had a dream he wanted to fulfill. Taro thought Poro was a fool for falling for his story. Poro went on to say that his dream was to become a guitarist. Taro couldn't believe that Poro would do that for him, but a shot rang out and Bodo laughed, saying he was a pretty interesting kid. His bullet went straight into Poro's face. Bodo decided to say something. He hoped it would be his consolation in the afterlife. He smiled and thought that there were quite a few people in this world who would never find a chance to talk to him. Taro was furious with the Bodo, but then he heard the voice of Poro. The hero smiled and said that it made sense to him. He showed the bullet that was on his tongue and said he would be aware of it in the future. Everyone present, including the head of the Bodo himself, was horrified by this sight. Some time later, a report told of the sudden cessation of the criminal gang's activities. The captured criminal, also known as Chief Ukama Bodo, when apprehended, claimed that the kid had destroyed him. Amidst this news, the kid rummaged through his locker and tried to find the guitar he hadn't played for so long. He had bought it 2 years ago. Taking the guitar in his hands, the guy thought that since coming to Tokyo he might have learned how to play. After that, Poro couldn't shake off his overly suspicious attitude for 3 days. When he got a call from Yuta, Poro thought he was being tricked by a con artist. But Yuta had no idea what he meant. Poro was the prince of the demon world, and he was in a terrible hurry. He ran as fast as he could and asked to be waited for. The hero busied himself with raising the children, but he could not catch up with them. Poro shouted that Yuta Dono was not yet dressed. The hero didn't understand why he had to do this and remembered the situation that happened earlier. Earlier, he met 2 demons who tried to kill him. They threatened that they would definitely destroy him today and become great demon kings. Yuta laughed that they were back at it, and Kimura gave them the middle finger and said that they wouldn't touch his teacher. Nana thought it was funny that they were wading into the water without knowing the wade. Poro rolled his eyes and told the demons that they were all just as incorrigible. The hero supposed they could have found a better use for their enthusiasm, but the demons laughed and said that this time he would definitely get it right. They showed him the frog of youth and said it would turn him into a snot, and when he became a baby, they would surely destroy him in no time. One of the demons threw the frog right at the Poro, but the Poro beat it back with just one sweep of his arm. He said that such primitive magic wouldn't work on him, but he didn't see the frog hit his friends. In an instant after the frog exploded, all his friends became like children. The guy was horrified that they had become children from the impact of the wave and tried to see if his Yuta understood. Lifting the child in his arms, the hero made sure that the Yuta was exactly like a child. But trouble had not only befallen them, and Poro heard a demon screaming behind him. He was trying to bring his partner to his senses. This projectile was thrown back by Poro's magic, and this damned spell will only be able to save him after sleep. The demon grabbed the frog and his partner under his arms and threatened the hero as he ran away to recall him. Poro understood and assumed that it was no big deal and the spell would break after they woke up. In that case, he had only one way out. One was to put everyone to sleep as quickly as possible and return them to their previous state. The book said that in order to put a child to sleep faster, you had to play with them as much as possible during the day, and Poro thought it would be pretty simple. But these babies weren't even going to fall asleep. The hero didn't realize how much longer they were going to rampage and realized that the babies were a terrible force. Yuta tried to trash the whole house, but Poro asked him to stop doing that. Kimura likened himself to Yuta and began to imitate him, which only made things worse. The Poro was distracted by the boys when suddenly he heard laughter and loud banging behind him. It was the girls and Rika, who was playing with fire again. Poro had gotten to the point of buying them toys, which the children were happy to play with, and now he decided that he should have waited until they themselves were asleep. He finally realized how difficult it was for humans to raise children after all. In the demon world, they were pushed down the mountain to learn everything on their own, and if the children right after birth were strong enough to eat their parents, there was no point in raising them at all. The hero did not understand why people still go through such horrible tortures. While he was thinking about this, a Kimura crawled up to him and asked him to read him a story. At that moment his heart thumped loudly. He still couldn't believe that the brutal and book-hating Kimura Dano had asked him to read to him. For some reason it gave the hero strange thoughts, but he opened the book and started reading. Poro tried his best not to remember his childhood or involve the kid in his stupid hobbies. Poro's mother always thought that helping him eat and reading him stories before bed was unheard of. She believed that there was no way he would become strong if he imitated those pathetic people so much. By the way, there were many other wonderful qualities besides strength, and the mother wanted to teach that to her child. Poro smiled as he thought of his mother. She believed that this was what her maternal duty was all about. The hero noticed that Kimura began to wipe his eyes and assumed he wanted to sleep. Poro hoped he would fall asleep as soon as possible, but then behind him he heard quick baby steps in their direction. The playful Yuta was trying to annoy the Kimura and threw water ships at him from Poro. This is what he called balls filled with water. When the water balloons doused Kimura and Poro with water, Yuta laughed loudly. Poro quickly began to wipe himself and Kimura, not realizing what Yuta was doing. Yuta looked defiantly at Kimura, who was now clearly not sleepy. Kimura threw himself in pursuit of the Yuta, and Poro became overly offended. The Kimura would have fallen asleep, but there was no time to be upset, as the girls' voices could be heard behind him. It was now Na and Ryuugaku decided to measure their strength, from which Poro was terrified. All the children were fighting among themselves like cats and dogs, and Poro tried with all his might to restrain them. He needed to find a place where they could play without paying attention to each other. Poro immediately thought of the playground and decided to take them there. The children were delighted. Ryuugaku rode on the slide and Yuta took over the children's swings. The park was quite wide, there were lots of other children and it was possible to play without violence. Poro thought it was a good idea. Poro could hear the girls sitting nearby on a bench discussing him. They thought he was someone's older brother. They thought he was young enough to be walking the streets and not going to school. People saw him as a suspicious type and decided to keep an eye on him. They speculated that he might be a criminal and was looking out for children. It seems that the Poro just had a complete change of heart and decided to ignore it. Poro noticed one of the children taking a doll away from a little girl. She tried to take it back, but the full boy was taller and stronger than her. He lifted the doll above his head and laughed at the girl. At some point he got tired of this and pushed the girl to the ground and she fell. He threw the doll away, which also became uninteresting to him, and went to the sandbox where the others were playing. The mother immediately rushed to comfort her child who had been hurt by the boy. The full child went into the sandbox where he happily destroyed the structures of the Kimura and the other children. All the children in the neighborhood cried, but the Kimura dared to fight back and grabbed the boy by his shirt. Poro tried to stop the Kimura, but no sooner had he made a remark than the mother of the rowdy boy slapped the boy and ordered him to keep his hands off her son. Poro didn't understand why she slapped him, but the mother said he started it first. Poro tried to prove to her that it was because her son was hurting the others. The mother was angry that Poro had decided to blame it on them, and said it was her duty as a mother to protect her child. Poro could agree that it was a mother's duty to protect her child, but it was also necessary to explain to them what they could and could not do, showing them what brings joy and teaching them many other things, for this was also their duty. The mother didn't understand what he was saying, but all the other parents could agree with him and told the woman that Poro was right. They saw that she never scolded Takati-chan, even if he did something bad. On the contrary, she only lost her temper. The guy who was sitting with the other mothers shouted that they should have had custody of the children, but not to that extent. Taka's mother disagreed with them but was not going to answer them. While her son was shedding tears into his mother's skirt, a Kimura came up to him and extended his hand as a sign of reconciliation. He not only extended his hand, but also a dustpan and bucket to build a sandcastle. Eventually, after the children reconciled, Poro apologized to his mother, but the woman also apologized and said that she had said too much to him. After a walk outside, all the children finally fell asleep, which Poro was very happy about. He carried all the children on his back and decided that now they could go home. Poro was very tired from the day. The children were strange creatures to him, and it seemed to him that he had been fiddling with them for quite a while. But strangely enough, it didn't annoy him at all. He wondered if his mother had felt the same way when he was little. After the boys woke up, they couldn't figure out how they had found themselves in Hidoshi's house. Everyone was clueless, but for some reason they woke up here. They leaned over the sleepy Poro and said it was morning. They also wondered why there were so many toys here. But the sleeping Poro looked pretty happy to them and they decided to let him sleep a little longer. The friends thought that the hero might have had a good dream. At this time, the demon Fu still could not appease his partner and tearfully begged him to sleep. He was even ready to do it himself. After a while, the Tenchai Shrine Festival came to the city of Tokyo. Ryuugaku wore a rather unfamiliar outfit that embarrassed her. She couldn't believe that it could suit her. Besides, it was rather uncomfortable in it. Ryuugaku's cheeks were flaming and her heart couldn't stop. Poro told Ryuugaku that he was just looking for her. He showed her the newspaper of the festival and said that tomorrow they would go there together. The girl thought that the festival was something like a street fight, but Poro replied that it wasn't like that at all. It wasn't like a demon festival, and there was definitely no need to kill anyone here. In that case, Ryuugaku wasn't interested and declined. Poro said goodbye to her and said they would see each other tomorrow, but Ryuugaku reminded him that she refused. Ryuugaku frowned and thought she had more trouble. Her classmates came up behind her and told the girl that she was lucky. They thought it was pretty cool that she would go on a date with a guy during the festival. The girls thought that she and Kirigami-kun always looked pretty cute, which made Ryuugaku feel awkward. A classmate noticed that Ryuugaku was so excited that she couldn't say anything back. Her friend could also bet that they would probably kiss while watching the fireworks. Ryuugaku was even more speechless and the girls said that now she looked like a funny monkey. Her friend had an extra yukata that she could lend her. She thought that this yukata would fit the Kagami-san perfectly. After Ryuugaku wore the yukata, she stopped realizing how she could have fallen for it. As Ryuugaku walked through the streets, she noticed that there were indeed only couples here. She didn't understand why Poro had called her to this festival and started making things up. She imagines them watching the fireworks and the Poro tells her that they are beautiful. But then the Poro puts his hand on her head and tells her that he is not as beautiful as she is. With these thoughts, Ryuugaku felt as if she was going crazy and clutched her cheeks. While she was hovering in the clouds, Poro approached her and apologized for waiting. Poro also put on a yukata and was surprised that she came here early to admire the festival. Yuta-dono also lent him his clothes, but Poro noticed that something was wrong with Ryuugaku. Ryuugaku crouched down to the ground and admitted that her legs were shaking. The hero didn't understand what was wrong, as she was wearing a beautiful yukata. Poro laughed and thanked Ryuugaku for helping him study today, but Ryuugaku didn't understand what he meant. The thing is, he had invited Yuta-dono and Kimura first, but they had some business to attend to. It was said that festivals were a tradition that combined culture and religion. Poro wanted to be sure to write everything about this joyous and important event in his diary. It was the right time for amazing discoveries. Poro asked Ryuugaku to look at the apple he had in his hands. Even this apple had a combination of flavor and freshness that spoke of human wisdom. Ryuugaku was offended and realized how insensitive and stale the hero was. It was said that in such places guys and girls start loving each other more than before, and Ryuugaku couldn't tell him that she was counting on that. The hero suggested that they go ahead, but the girl asked him to stop. Poro didn't understand what was the matter and the Ryuugaku remembered the girl's instructions. They asked to tell the boy that she was afraid of getting lost in the crowd and should have offered to hold their hands. That's what they thought. Kagami-san would be more timid. Ryuugaku held out her hand to the guy and tried to find the right words. She was so nervous that she accidentally hit the full man that was behind her and fell to the ground. Ryuugaku suggested they hold hands so they wouldn't get lost in the crowd. At one point they turned to see a man who was complaining about being burned like lava. His comrades lifted up the man who was screaming how much pain he was in. He felt like he had been run over by a truck. Poro smiled and said that this guy had obviously never encountered demons in a crowd. Ryuugaku was brought to tears by the hurt and seemed to hate her power for the first time. Poro offered to think of others in such a case and took the surprised Ryuugaku by the arm. The hero smiled and said it would be safer that way, so as not to accidentally push anyone, and offered to go on. Ryuugaku stared at the Poro and decided that he just doesn't understand anything. At that moment, Ryuugaku decided to show him how she felt. They came to a shooting range where they had to knock things down with a shot. The girls had previously suggested that Ryuuka show the Poro her excitement a little, and since she had to do it, Ryuuka took the gun and took aim. Her shot missed the target and the girl pretended to be unlucky and grinned. The girls advised sweetly to get angry in case she missed. But looking at Poro, Ryuuka felt uneasy. Poro had taken this game responsibly and calculated a distance of 3 meters. He said something about the charge of the magic and the strength of the resistance. In any case, Poro thought that without magic the projectile would not fly and it was necessary to use it. Poro took aim and fired, letting the magic wind carry that bullet. The shot was so powerful that the surprised Ryuuka's hair fell back. The bullet ricocheted off and hit every object in the shooting gallery. In the end, the Poro left the surprised old man in the shooting gallery with nothing. Everyone marveled at his shot and said it was amazing. Plus he hit everything with 1 bullet. Ryuuka was crazy about Poro, who even took games seriously, and that was pretty direct. Ryuuka thought it should have been her and got upset. It was enough for Poro that he hit the target, so he gave back all the goods. He was more excited about the cotton candy. The hero didn't understand how only water could stop being so airy. Ryuuka became wary when she heard some shouting and apologizing nearby. A certain man grabbed a passerby and made him apologize to the child. After all, he had dared to deprive him of his takoyage, which was quite expensive. The child was agitated and told the uncle that he forgave him. The guys decided to go over and sort out the situation. The guy who was holding the passerby recognized the Kagami teacher and wished them a good evening. He smiled sweetly and said he was just telling one trespasser how he shouldn't have done things. The man that was grabbed was getting a terrible shiver. The guy who was dealing with the passerby turned out to be a Kimura. Poro realized why he couldn't go with them. Kimura told the guys that Hitoshi was also supposed to be somewhere nearby. He showed his friends the first-class fish entertainment and offered them a taste. Poro was delighted and offered to take a look at these goldfish to Ryuuka. Ryuuka doubted if the fish could be caught with that paper thing in his hands. Here she again remembered the girl's advice. She had to slouch slightly so that her breasts were visible and look seductively at the spawn. Her friend blushed at that moment and asked her classmate not to overdo it. But Ryuuka thought that it could really create a special atmosphere for her and decided to do it. Kimura asked her to be more careful. Ryuuka only had time to notice a goldfish that jumped out of the water and ended up right in her yukata, causing her to scream. Ryuuka fell to the ground and laughed at the terrible tickle. Meanwhile, the guys looked at the girl incomprehensibly. After that, she and the Poro went on their way. The hero was delighted with such a variety of activities, but Ryuuka was upset that she didn't succeed. By the way, the Poro wondered what that creepy mask was on Ryuuka. Ryuuka thought in horror that it didn't fit her at all, but the Poro didn't know what she meant. Earlier, the girls had advised her to get his attention with a cute mask, so she tried her best and chose the cutest one. But apparently the Poro didn't like it. Ryuuka sadly clutched her head. Suddenly the Poro ran forward. He thought he spotted a Yudo, and left Ryuuka alone. Yudo was happy to see the Poro and said that the yukata suited him. Poro looked at the cotton candy with a twinkle in his eyes. He thought it looked like a cloud being born and told the Ryuuku that it was amazing. Yuda smiled and said that people eat these sweet and soft clouds. But then he asked the Poro about the Ryuuka. He had not seen her and the Poro looked around questioningly. The hero told Yuda that they were together all the time. Yuda sighed heavily and told his friend that he was clueless. He offered to look for her and gave the hero a bag of absorbent cotton. Poro thanked Yuta and then went off to look for her. The hero didn't understand where Ryuuka could have gone. At the same time, the girl thought there was nothing to be done about it. Everything she did before, still only to give birth to a child, and he again did not notice her feelings. Ryuuka didn't even pay attention to the guys walking by who offered the pretty girl to set off fireworks with them. The upset Ryuuka started crying and decided that she was just like people in her feelings. She didn't even notice how she swept away the guys who were now writhing on the ground in pain. The girl thought it would be weird if it were a real date, so it was a good thing the Poro didn't notice anything. Suddenly, she heard the callers offering to buy yakisoba for the pretty girl. They were saying that their yakisoba was the best in the demon world. The girl looked coldly at the two demons that were always chasing the poor. They didn't expect to see her here at all and were confused. They were in shock, not realizing which fly had bitten Ryuuka. The demon suggested to his comrade to at least change places, but the Ryuuka asked them how much yakisoba cost. She asked for 1 yakisoba as well as a beer. The demons were confused and reminded her that she was a schoolgirl after all. Ryuuka ordered them to shut up and not to imitate humans. Poro couldn't find Ryuuka, but suddenly he heard some shouting. The demons were telling Ryuuka that she had had too much to drink, but Ryuuka ordered them to shut up and pour her some more. Ryuuka raged and shouted that this is not a holiday, and threatened to burn everyone immediately. The demons did not remember how much she drank, but Fu said that she drank about 100 glasses. The girl ordered not to whisper and bring her more. Poro approached Ryuugaku and asked what was wrong with her. It seemed to him that she had a bad tolerance for alcohol. The girl noticed Poro and said she was just about to pass out until he came. Poro took her in his arms and apologized to the demons for what had happened. Ryuugaku raged and demanded that he let her go, because his journal was more important to him than she was. The demons stared after them, puzzled, trying to figure out what had just happened. Late in the evening, it was time for fireworks. All the humans sat on the steps and watched the fireworks in silence. Poro smiled and admitted that it was indeed beautiful. He thanked Ryuugaku for spending the day with him, but Ryuugaku told him to shut up and said she had only seen his politeness in his coffin. Ryuugaku lowered her gaze and said that she came here for no clear reason. She tried to say that she didn't care about the festival or him equally. She didn't even see Poro reach up to her face and lean over her for a kiss. Poro smiled at her and assumed that people who meet during the festival do that. He didn't know if it could be different with brides or if it was different. The hero looked fearfully at Ryuugaku, who appeared to him to have her soul out of her body. Satisfied, Ryuugaku said that now she could die. But Poro didn't understand why she would do that. At that time, absolutely everyone was happily watching the fireworks from different points in the city. Everyone was spending the summer in their own way. Even Nana's brother had come to this festival. Angel pulled out a number 1, causing the shopkeeper to be shocked. After all, he hadn't even put such a number there. Nana grinned and assumed that God had peeked at everything. The demon world was in chaos. All the demons were busy doing their own things, but they behaved surprisingly reserved and human. Everyone had their own worries. A huge dragon told the baby that he would be late for school. Someone said his child had a fever, so he wouldn't come to class today. Someone was listening to a new phantom tune. Some monster was yelling that he was a cool drummer. A dark, sinister-looking demon was telling the others that the gates of hell in France are awesome. No one would have thought that the demon world could have changed so much. There were hardly any battles here now. When the new Demon King abolished the power divisions 3 years ago and started imitating humans, everyone was very surprised. But it turned out that it even became more fun that way. Poro had always wanted to change that, and it was very important. The huge demon asked his lordship to see his plan to install traffic lights, as well as calculating the cost of building a stadium and a baseball field. He needed the king's permission. Thanks to the media, the number of visitors to the stores and cafes tripled. The Dems discussed at the same time a draft of the project that was ready. They will review it at the next legislative session. A package from Amazon also came in. Hearing all this, the great king of demons Poro signed the document and said with tears that he could not live like this anymore. Now every hellish day he had one job. Any entertainment was out of the question because he had no time even to sleep. He asked the demons to give him at least some time to rest. But the little long-eared demon told his majesty that it was impossible. After his lordship returned from the human world 3 years ago, the demon world began to change rapidly due to his reforms. Power used to be everything, but now the value system had changed, giving rise to a new need. The ruler had to listen to the wishes of the people, but if he wanted to rest, it was always possible to commit suicide. With a smile on his face, the little beast thought that Poro was dying from work. It seemed to the hero that in the world of the people it was called Black Company. Poro grabbed his head, because the information recorded in the diary was already 3 years out of date, and there were more and more problems. He greatly missed the quiet days in the human world. As soon as he thought about it, the wall in front of him shattered and someone called out to his lordship. Poro fell to the floor as his 2-year-old Pirika son attacked him and sat on his father. The hero looked at the child and told him he was very busy. Monsters broke into the ruined wall and realized that the prince was here. They told the Pirika that his lordship was busy and that he could play with the ministers. Poro turned to the ministers and realized that his son had once again crept away from them. Apparently he was bored with picture books since he had gotten here so unexpectedly. They tried to stop him, but he pushed away all the ministers with one blow, whose combined strength, by the way, was 100. The monsters could not stop the prince, who was incredibly strong. Guy took the baby in his arms and wondered from whom he could inherit so much strength. The baby started to pull on his cheek, but the threshold asked him to let go. The hero apologized to his son and said that he had a lot of things to do now and could not play with him. Poro asked to wait a little longer and play with the others for now. Poro realized that things were bad when tears started to appear in the Piriki's eyes. In an instant, the entire palace was destroyed and everyone realized that the prince had cried again. While the Poro was trying to catch up with his son, All the other demons ran after His Majesty. They shouted that he would have to sign documents to build a castle and a bunch of other things. The whole city was shaken by an explosion and the monsters thought it was an earthquake. But it turned out to be just a son of Poro that could have destroyed the whole city. The monsters tried to catch up with his lordship with their business, but the Poro said he had no time for that now. At that moment, the two demons thanked everyone for attending the conference exhibition in honor of the sale of 10 billion copies of the book Fu in Paradise, Travel Notes from the Human World. A woman with hair in the shape of snakes asked Mr. Fu and Mr. Heaven to tell them their plans. The demons were delighted at how much they had sold and confessed that they were true geniuses of commerce. This was what the result of gathering materials for several hundred years had cost them. Fu and Paradise became Nobel Prize-winning writers in literature. Everyone was thrilled that they had been curious about the human world several hundred years ago. The demons replied that it was their earlier research, and then they learned from the Demon King how beautiful the human world was. No sooner had they finished speaking than the son of Poro destroyed their building in a flash, and all the demons were in the rubble. Meanwhile, Ryuugaku grinned and thought it was a good idea to wake up and go to the market early. It was rare to be able to buy such a fresh ribeye. She wanted to make a dish called sashimi out of the huge monster chained up. Suddenly she heard the cries of a Poro who asked her to stop the Piraku. The infant was running straight at her. Ryuugaku stretched her arms forward and asked her son to come to her. She had already realized that he had made a mess of things again and didn't know what to do about it. Ryuugaku picked up the Piraku in her arms, who flew into her mother with terrible force. The girl smiled and said that earlier she had asked him to play with the ministers, because daddy was busy and couldn't be disturbed. Poro did not understand why he always became calm together with Ryuugaku, and apparently that was what it meant to be a mother. No sooner had the hero stopped than a bunch of demonic hands laid on his shoulders. The demons plowed his lordship to the ground and said they had caught him. They asked him to get back to work and Poro remarked that they had rather intimidating ways of searching. Ryuugaku laughed and thought it was a real terror. Piraku held out his hand and Ryuugaku turned his attention to his son. Everything around him swirled in a terrifying whirlwind and the girl thought he should have changed his diaper. Ryuugaku grinned and said that no matter how many she bought, they weren't enough. Poro could barely hold it together and told her that if Ryuugaku didn't do something about it, their town would flood. But even this natural disaster didn't stop the demons from pulling their papers to Poro and asking him to sign them. The hero was shocked that they were doing this seriously. After a horrible day, the Poro came home and collapsed on his bed. He was terribly tired and the Ryuugaku was thrilled that they were able to rebuild the palace in just a second and was grateful. Poro had a decent job, a family he loved, but he didn't know if he could have been any happier. He looked at the frame where there was a picture of him and his friends. But during his busy work days, he kept remembering the wonderful time he had in the human world. He thought he would never go there again and there was nothing he could do about it. Suddenly Ryuugaku stuck a piece of paper to Poro's forehead, but Poro didn't realize what was wrong with it. The girl smiled and called it a surprise. The guy looked at the ticket that led from the demon world to the human world. Ryuugaku smiled and said that he must have met them sometimes and promised not to tell the ministers. Poro was too serious and he needed to rest sometimes. Ryuugaku smiled and told him to say hello to them. She noticed that Poro's hand began to tremble, but Ryuugaku didn't realize what was wrong. The happy Poro tearfully hugged Ryuugaku and said he loved her. The girl grinned and reciprocated. She was even sorry that they were not alone now. In the end, the hero entrusted everything to others and went to the human world. He was worried that everything would be alright in the demon world. 3 years for the demon world, it's almost a blink of an eye, but for humans, it's quite a long period of time. Poro thought that his friends might have forgotten about him, but suddenly the hero heard familiar voices and turned around. It was Kamui, who noticed that the guy had left his job and family and was now traveling alone. The guy smiled and said that their conductors do that too and asked to see his ticket. Nana winked at the Poro and suggested lunch. The hero was shocked, not understanding what they were doing here. Kamui replied that they were here for various reasons and inquired about the Poro's business. Nana hugged the poor Poro, but the hero didn't know what she meant. The girl thought that he couldn't bear to live with this vile woman and had run away from her, but now everything would be alright. Nana was ready to teach him true love and offered Poro to run away with her right now. Poro did not understand her at all. While Nana was clinging to Poro, Kamui decided to take a picture of them and send it to Ryuugaku, but Poro ordered him not to do it. After all, it could have been life-threatening. Poro thought they had come to mock him, but the boys said they had come to praise him. When he said he wanted to change the demon world, Kamui thought he was an idiot, so he kept trying to stop him from doing it, but he somehow managed to do it perfectly. Kamui smiled at the Poro and admitted that he was cool. so they came here to tell him that, which surprised the Poro. The hero smiled, but said that such cheap compliments did not please him at all. Kamui grabbed the hero by the scruff of the neck and opened the train window. He looked down and said in surprise that the guys were already students and they were right below. Poro didn't understand what he meant. At that moment, Kamui threw Poro out the window and told him to say hi to them. The hero flew downstairs screaming. Nana was worried that he would definitely arrive where he needed to go, but her brother smiled and reminded her that he was a god after all. He smirked and said that as long as he fell, he wouldn't know it. Nana told her brother that he was pretty bad. Kimura turned to Yuta, who was sitting next to him at the desk, and the guy smiled. Kamui managed to land a Poro right in the center of the auditorium where there were quite a few students. In doing so, the Poro made a huge hole in the building upon landing. These looks from people made the hero feel painful, and he wanted to find his friends as soon as possible. As soon as he thought about it, he heard someone's footsteps in his direction. Kimura tearfully hugged his teacher and squealed that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Yuta was more restrained and silently walked down to them. Kimura spared the Poro from his embrace and the hero looked at Yuta. Yuta smiled at his friend and said they hadn't seen each other in a while. He was unsurprised that the Poro had started crashing the auditorium again. The hero felt embarrassed, but anyway, he was happy to see Yuta and said that he looked great. Poro got to his feet and out of his pocket fell a diary that contained the picture of the two of them together.